Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Teresa Kohnle. James Kohnle was born on February 22, 1950, in Dayton, Ohio. He was the son of Ruth Slack and John Kohnle. They had 4 more daughters and 3 sons. The family was wealthy. His grandfather, Fred Kohnle, was a successful businessman and inventor who founded a company and held nearly 300 patents for innovations, including one of the first price marking machines. Despite his business success, little is known about James' early life. However, it is clear that he chose a different career path. Instead of joining the family business, he moved to North Georgia, where he worked diligently to create a successful company in the field of holistic medicine. James was assisted by Bonnie White, the accounting manager of his company. In return for her work, James also provided chiropractic care to Bonnie's children and grandchildren. As Bonnie said, James's kind and compassionate nature helped him build a loyal clientele. Over time, the business grew and James realized the need to hire more employees. At the time, 21-year-old Teresa Kohnle applied for the job and was accepted. She would be responsible for welcoming visitors to the company. Teresa, who was from Harlan, Kentucky, met James when she got a job at his company. Despite their 20-year age difference, they fell in love and began dating. After marrying in 1997, Teresa and her husband had their first son, Caleb, in 1996. They later opened the Alpha Wellness Center in Dalton, Georgia. At the center, Teresa worked as a massage therapist, helping people achieve good health. As a friend of the couple, Bonnie witnessed their professional growth. She said that Teresa was a truly wonderful massage therapist. Their second child, Allison, was born in 2000. And soon after, they moved to a spacious house in Ringgold, Georgia, located near the tennis courts. The marriage was stable and happy, and the children grew up in comfort and love. Christmas was a special time of year for Caleb, who immersed himself in the joy of the holiday season, surrounded by gifts, a beautifully decorated tree, and the warmth of a fireplace. As he immersed himself in the happiness of the moment, he dreamed of many ways to protect himself and, in turn, his loved ones. James took out a $500,000 life insurance policy from Tom Drew, naming Teresa as the sole beneficiary. He also insured their home at the same time. However, their ideal life begins to fall apart over time due to growing rumors of infidelity in their marriage. At Alpha Healthcare, the news eventually spread to all the staff. Unfortunately, the situation worsened due to rumors of infidelity in James and Teresa's marriage, as well as financial difficulties. James's health began to decline after contracting Lyme disease, leaving him unable to work. Meanwhile, Teresa underwent 4 surgeries and suffered a miscarriage, leading to severe depression and substance abuse. At the same time, Bonnie discovered that Teresa had been illegally embezzling money from the business. In 1 month, Teresa herself wrote 16 checks. When James confronted her about this in front of Bonnie, his wife denied everything, claiming that the checks had been canceled. However, Bonnie, as the accountant, claimed that the canceled checks would not be cleared through the bank, and she later produced a bank statement, putting Teresa in an awkward position. A rumor began to circulate among the couple's staff, claiming that Teresa had secretly put lithium in James's coffee. James himself eventually revealed the rumor, rather than suppress the speculation. An investigation revealed that their relationship had deteriorated to the point where divorce was being considered, although the details remained unclear. By mid-2007, the family situation had become unstable. 2 cars had been repossessed and James appeared visibly depressed. However, the announcement that he was about to be evicted for failing to pay the mortgage was a wake-up call for the couple. Teresa devised a plan to resolve her marital, financial and personal crises. The plan began with her pretending to be her husband and writing a letter to their agent, Tom Drew, stating that her husband had decided to end his life. Early on Friday morning, June 29, 2007, Teresa prepared to carry out the rest of her plan. During their usual breakfast, Teresa secretly added strong antidepressants to her husband's food. In the meantime, she refused to eat, telling her husband that a friend named Robin would be picking her and the children up. The woman took the children to a friend's house after James had taken the medication. Teresa then returned home to prepare for her trip. She quickly gathered what she considered important items, including photos of the children. Next, she lit a fire between the office and the bedroom. Caleb and his sister were waiting in the car and saw their mother leave the house last. She lit a cigarette as she walked away. From the car, Caleb noticed smoke coming from the house and became frightened. He warned his mother about the smoke, but she reassured him that it was just burning papers and that there was nothing to worry about. Gary Carlock, a local grocery store owner, was on his way to work when he saw smoke coming from a house and quickly called emergency services. Fire crews arrived at the scene at 9:42 a.m. After assessing the situation, they determined that the fire could not be extinguished from the outside, so they decided to enter the house through the back door, which led directly to the bedroom. A firefighter examined the room and noticed a disturbing image on their thermal imaging equipment, indicating the presence of a person. As they cautiously approached through the smoke, they found the person kneeling by the bed, apparently praying. The person was unconscious but did not appear to have suffered severe heat burns. However, their skin and clothing were heavily covered in smoke. Firefighters described the scene as a typical arson fire. They initially identified the victim as James, 57, the homeowner, and quickly pronounced him dead. The raging fire destroyed everything, including potential DNA evidence or signs of foul play, leading police to initially suspect the death was accidental. Police eventually reached James' wife, Teresa, by phone to report the incident, who was in Georgia. When Teresa left town, she contacted her insurance agent just minutes later. However, the children were devastated to hear the news about James, their beloved father. Although they had their own problems, he always showed them how important they were in his life. An extensive investigation was launched, but progress was slow due to a lack of leads. Teresa was interviewed by police that evening and recounted the events of the morning. She said she left the house at 8:15 a.m. and stopped at a restaurant on the way. Robin, Teresa's friend, was also questioned, and his story largely matched Teresa's, except that he claimed they left 30 minutes later, at 8:45 a.m. The fire inspector determined that the fire started at a point along the shared wall between the office and the bedroom where the victim was found. As officers continued to search the house, a trained dog was brought in to assist. The dog helped detect the presence of arson at the source of the fire, clearly indicating that it was set deliberately rather than accidentally. On July 5, 2007, officers interviewed Teresa to piece together the events of that day. Teresa stated that she loved her husband very much and attributed their financial difficulties solely to James' illness. She described their marriage as stable and reliable. Friends and colleagues of James confirmed that his failing health had forced him to stop working, causing difficulties for his business. At the time, Tom Drew reported to police that he had received a handwritten letter from James in which James expressed his intention to end his life. However, there were countless ways to do it, much simpler, less painful. It was hard to believe he would choose such a method. The medical examiner determined James' cause of death to be smoke inhalation, and toxicology tests showed that he had been under the influence of strong antidepressants at the time of the fire. Burns on the soles of his feet indicated that he had tried to put out the flames. Based on this evidence, forensic psychologist Sanji believed the death was the result of homicide. Police re-interviewed Robin, focusing on inconsistencies between his account of events and Teresa's. Robin testified that after putting the children in the car, Teresa went back into the house and did not return for 15 to 20 minutes. The investigation led the team to a restaurant where Teresa and her children stopped for a snack. Security footage showed them arriving at 9:17 a.m. on the day of the fire. Since their home was only a 10-minute drive away, police suspected that Teresa might have been home when the fire started. A closer look at the timeline confirmed this theory, and police obtained a search warrant for Teresa Kohnle's home. When they arrived, they found the family's personal belongings stored in the garage, as well as unfiled divorce papers. Further investigation uncovered 2 insurance policies, one for life and one for the home. As police zeroed in on Teresa, they learned details about the loss of her youngest child and her subsequent drug addiction. From that point on, based on the evidence they found, she was considered the prime suspect. During a subsequent interview, the couple's employees talked about rumors of an affair, so police decided to call Teresa back. During her second conversation with the police, Teresa not only defended herself, but also began to change her story. According to Teresa, her husband James was a cruel madman, and she even said that in her opinion, he was capable of starting the fire himself, even if it meant completely destroying the property. When asked by the police, she told them about the morning of the incident. Teresa tried to recall her morning routine. She said that she and her husband usually woke up around 6:30 to 7 o'clock. They usually spent this time together, either drinking coffee or chatting. However, she could not provide further details, saying that her actions were out of habit. The drugs found in James' blood were the first topic that the police wanted to address, so they started by asking Teresa about the drugs her husband was taking. Initially, she listed them without any problem, but when the police wanted to know which specific drug made James sleepy, she suddenly forgot the name. She then asked for a moment. She tried to recall the name, which began with a C, presumably C. Carville. However, when asked about the insurance policy, which they believed would be a crucial solution to the woman's problems, Teresa chose to downplay its importance, claiming that she did not even care to know the value of the policy. It was clear that the investigation would be difficult, but Teresa persisted. The police then revealed an equally important piece of information. An incendiary substance had been discovered at the crime scene, but Teresa once again seemed to dodge the issue. Teresa defended her actions by explaining that her husband had painted the house a few days earlier, which would explain the presence of an incendiary substance. She also suggested that this substance could have been the cause of the fire and could have accelerated the spread of the fire. During the investigation, Teresa mentioned that she and her husband often drank coffee together every morning. The police found this information suspicious, thinking that she might have taken advantage of this opportunity to secretly give her husband sedatives. However, Teresa later revealed that her husband had not had coffee with her in recent months. This statement was completely contrary to her previous statement, and the police immediately pointed out the contradiction. Teresa even denied her own words and contradicted herself. At that time, the police only had circumstantial evidence against her, until one of them suggested that she take a lie detector test, suggesting that she would do everything to prove that she did not kill her husband. However, before the test, Teresa was required to sign a written agreement stating that if the results showed deception, the police could use this evidence against her in court. As she prepared to undergo the test, Teresa's concerns shifted from the original crime to a new fear, the possibility that the polygraph test could be used as evidence against her if she failed. Before taking the polygraph test, she was concerned about how much information the police had on her, as a false answer could seriously damage her case. However, the results of the polygraph test showed that she exceeded the maximum lie detector threshold, indicating that she was likely hiding something. Based on the evidence gathered, on July 9, 2007, Teresa, 34, was charged with premeditated murder and 2 counts of first-degree arson. Her attorney later argued that the fire that led to the charges was actually a joint plan between Teresa and her husband, designed to improve their financial situation. After Teresa was arrested, her children, Allison, 6, and Caleb, 11, were placed in the care of Georgia Children and Family Services. During an interview on July 16, Caleb showed a surprising level of interest for his age. He told police what had happened that morning, including his mother returning home while he and his sister were in the car. Caleb also mentioned noticing smoke shortly afterward. He explained that his parents often burned trash in the backyard, which made the smoke seem normal at first. However, police said it was unlikely that his mother would have chosen to burn the trash just before leaving. Instead, they suspect she may have given James drugs that rendered him unconscious, then set fire to the bedroom while he was still in bed. Understandably, this was difficult for the children. However, despite the traumatic experience deeply affecting their young minds, they remained strong. Caleb's grandparents were then able to obtain custody, and the court was compassionate enough to allow Teresa to visit them. The police then shared evidence with Teresa, clarifying that her children could be called to testify against her. Initially, her defense contacted the district attorney's office, asking for a plea deal. The deputy district attorney investigating the case admitted that she had reached a fair and reasonable plea deal, not wanting her children to go through such trauma. 2 days after the trial, Teresa accepted the plea deal. On the morning of December 10, 2010, a hearing was held. At the hearing, the judge asked Teresa if she would plead guilty to aggravated manslaughter, to which she answered yes. Teresa later explained to the court that her actions were part of a financial scheme, but that she never intended to harm her husband. She asked the court for leniency. The court accepted her testimony and, as a result, granted her more visitation time with her children. Additionally, Teresa Kohnle was convicted of first-degree arson. The state dropped the premeditated murder charge as part of the plea agreement. Teresa was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 30 years. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Antonia Barra. Antonia Barra was born on December 3, 1999, in Temuco, Chile, to a wealthy family. She was the youngest of 5 children, with 2 older brothers, Sebastian and Ignacio, and 2 sisters, Catalina and Carla. Antonia was particularly close to Catalina, whom she considered her best friend and confidant. Her parents valued education and encouraged their children to pursue their interests, including sports and music. As the youngest child, Antonia was especially loved and spoiled by her parents. Despite this, she was a diligent student and dreamed of studying tourism and traveling the world. At the age of 15, Antonia met Martin Pradines on social media in 2015. Martin was 8 years older than Antonia and lived in the same city. He was divorced and had a child from a previous marriage. Little is known about Martin's early life, except that he was born in February 1992 in Temuco to Ivan Pronis and Paula Dare. When Martin was 20, he got a girl from his school pregnant, and to avoid scandal and punishment, he married her. However, the marriage ended shortly after the birth of their child. Martin and Antonia were acquaintances who knew each other from socializing with young people on social networks between 2015 and 2017. However, their relationship remained purely platonic. After Antonia graduated from high school and enrolled in university, she relocated to a different city, and they lost touch. At university, Antonia focused on her studies in the travel industry, formed new friendships, and explored new hobbies. Martin was no longer on her mind. During her breaks from university, Antonia would return to her hometown but primarily stayed in touch with her family, including her parents and siblings. During her time at university, Antonia developed a close bond with a fellow student named Consuela Herb, and they became nearly inseparable. She also started a romantic relationship with a student named Rodrigo Aguad, which lasted for approximately a year. However, they got into a dispute at the beginning of the new semester in September 2019 and decided to take a break from each other. Antonio had recently gone through a breakup and was feeling down. Luckily, the Chilean national holiday was just around the corner, offering a long weekend and a chance to take her mind off things. She and her best friend decided to attend an electronic music festival in the charming town of Pucón. They carpooled with 3 classmates, using Consuela's car. As it happened, close friends of Antonio's family owned a summer house in Pucón, and since the owners were out of town, they kindly offered Antonio and her friend the use of their house, even providing them with the spare key. Upon arrival, the group split up, and they friends settled into the spacious and cozy house, looking forward to a relaxing weekend getaway. On the evening of September 18th, Antonia ran into Martín while walking around the city, and they struck up a conversation. As it turned out, Martín was also in town for the festival with his friends and was staying in a large rented house just outside the city center. They hit it off and made plans to meet up the next day at a party at a popular nightclub. Antonia called her parents to fill them in on her plans, and her father warned her to be careful and not to drink too much. Antonia laughed it off and promised to be responsible. The next day, Antonia and her friends spent hours getting ready for the party, choosing outfits and doing their makeup. Before heading out, they shared a bottle of wine and then took a taxi to the club. When they arrived, they ordered a bottle of champagne at the bar and drank it together before hitting the dance floor. It was after midnight when Martín and his friends arrived at the club. Antonia was already quite drunk by then, but she continued to drink and dance with Martín. According to her friend, Consuela, Antonia was advised to slow down, but she didn't listen. At one point, Consuela lost track of Antonia and spent half an hour searching for her. When she finally found her, Antonia was in another room with Martín, barely able to stand due to her intoxication. Consuela saw her classmate Benjamin Morales at the club and asked for his help in getting her friend Antonia home. However, Antonia refused to leave, saying the night was still young. A short while later, she started to feel unwell, and her friends took her outside for some fresh air. After she felt a bit better, she returned to the club. Consuela went to Antonia later that night and told her that she was exhausted and ready to head home. However, Antonia declined, wanting to stay and continue having fun. Consuela then left the club, giving up on convincing Antonia to leave with her. She took a taxi home and went straight to bed. Benjamin saw Martín escorting Antonia out of the club, holding her because she was swaying from side to side. According to Benjamin, Antonia was too drunk to fight back, and Martín took advantage of her state. They waited near the entrance for a while, allowing Antonia to recover a bit. Soon, Martín's friends arrived and suggested they continue partying at their rented house. The company ordered a taxi, but Martín and Antonia decided to walk, as she was unwell and disoriented. Surveillance cameras captured their walk, showing the man supporting a drunk student who was trying to break free from his grasp. Along the way, they stopped at a 24-hour supermarket, where Martín purchased beer. Inside the empty store, Martín attempted to kiss she, but she pushed him away and turned her back on him. It was clear she was uncomfortable, but her intoxication left her unable to resist or escape. Martín, being stronger, continued to lead Antonia, and they eventually arrived at the rented house around 8 a.m. The people in the living room saw that she was upset, but she was too drunk to clearly communicate her distress. Despite Antonia's obvious unease, Martín continued to hug and try to kiss her. The other friends, also heavily intoxicated, failed to intervene. Eventually, they retreated to a bedroom, where the man assaulted she while she was in a dazed state. Antonia was confused and disoriented as Martin ignored her attempts to resist and stop him. After the incident, he rejoined his friends in the living room and continued the party, leaving Antonia alone in the bedroom. Later, around 9 a.m., she managed to call Benjamin, but her speech was slurred and she was crying uncontrollably, making it hard for him to understand her. She was unable to explain what had happened or where she was. Benjamin became concerned and called Consuela, telling her that Antonia was in trouble and needed help. Antonia then called Consuela herself, struggling to communicate, and eventually found out her location, prompting Consuela to go to her aid. When Consuela met Martin at the doorstep, she asked him what had happened, but he just smiled and claimed that everything was consensual. However, when Consuela found her friend, Antonia, in one of the rooms, she was shocked by her condition. Antonia was crying and begged to be taken away from the place as soon as possible. They left shortly after and went home, where Antonia immediately took a shower. Despite her friend's advice to preserve the evidence and report the incident to the police, Antonia insisted that no one should ever find out what had happened. She tried to act normally when she spoke to her parents later that day, hiding her true emotions. The next morning, Antonia and her friends returned to the student dormitory. In the aftermath, Antonia struggled to cope with the trauma. She tried to forget the nightmare and resume her normal life, attending classes and socializing with friends. However, only Consuela noticed that Antonia was not okay. As time passed, Antonia's mental state deteriorated, and she gradually fell into a deep depression. Antonia was traumatized and didn't want to talk to anyone about what had happened to her. She refused to file a police report, fearing that it would only spread the news and make things worse. However, rumors about her began to circulate quickly. They would whisper, point, and laugh at her. One of her classmates even had the audacity to ask her about the rumors in front of everyone. However, what sent Antonia over the edge was a phone call from Rodrigo, her ex-boyfriend, with whom she still had strong feelings and had been holding on to the hope of rekindling their relationship. During the call, Rodrigo repeated all the rumors he had heard and told Antonia that he never wanted to see her again. Antonia broke down in tears, trying to defend herself and explain that the rumors were not true. But Rodrigo was unforgiving, using derogatory language to describe her and calling her promiscuous before hanging up. This conversation was devastating for Antonia, and she couldn't cope with the emotional pain. On Saturday, October 12, 2019, Antonia went to her parents' house, seeking comfort and solace with her family. Concern for Antonia's well-being grew as her relatives noticed a deep sadness in her eyes, despite her claims that everything was okay. Later that evening, she posted old childhood photos on social media, accompanied by a distressing message. The following day, after dinner with her family, Antonia retreated to her room on the third floor. Her sister Catalina checked on her about an hour later, but Antonia asked to be left alone, saying she wanted to sleep. Catalina granted her wish, turned off the light, and bid her a loving goodbye before leaving the room. 2 hours passed before their mother, Marcela, came to Antonia's room to announce that dinner was ready. After knocking on the door with no response, Marcela entered the room and initially thought Antonia was asleep. However, upon touching her hand, she was met with an unsettling stillness. Devastated, Marcela screamed for help, and the rest of the household rushed to the room. In a state of panic, they called for emergency services while attempting to revive Antonia on their own before medical professionals arrived. Antonia's situation had become hopeless, and she tragically took her own life by overdosing on sleeping pills. The investigation into her death and the first attempts to hold the perpetrator accountable began. The news shocked her family and friends, as many were unaware of the severe emotional distress Antonia had been experiencing. As Antonia's parents sought to understand what had happened to their daughter, they spoke with her friends and classmates. They were shocked by the rumors and gossip that had been circulating about Antonia. Consuela, in particular, shared everything she knew, but the parents felt that more needed to be done. They hired a top private detective to help reconstruct the events leading up to Antonia's death and gather evidence to bring the person responsible to justice. Alejandro, determined to seek justice for his daughter, used his connections to organize a press conference. In front of dozens of cameras, he shared the devastating truth: his daughter had been the victim of forced bullying, which she had been unable to survive. The person responsible, he emphasized, remained at large. The detective reconstructed the timeline of events from that fateful night and gathered statements from several key witnesses, including Consuela, Benjamin, and a few other university students, who were willing to testify in court. With all the evidence collected, the Antonia family petitioned the court to arrest and prosecute Martín for his actions. However, the police determined that the evidence presented was insufficient to warrant taking him into custody. Martín claimed that everything that happened was consensual, although he admitted that both parties were intoxicated. Furthermore, the victim did not report the incident to the police. As a result, Martín remained free, and he and his family subsequently filed a lawsuit against the Antonia family, accusing them of defamation, harassment, and the unauthorized disclosure of their personal information. According to the Martín family, Antonia's relatives had slandered their son and brother, Martín. In response, the Martín family decided to hold a press conference to defend themselves publicly. They argued that Martín's reputation had been harmed without justification and presented themselves as the ones who had been wronged. The Martín family also accused Antonia of sharing their personal contact information, including their home address, phone numbers, and social media handles. As a result, Martín and his family received daily insults and anonymous death threats. The Martín family maintained that Martín's guilt had not been proven and that everything had happened by mutual consent. They expressed their willingness to defend Martín's case in court. Surprisingly, after this statement, the police supported the Martín family, causing Antonia's relatives to stop making negative comments about them and to stop sharing personal data. This sudden change was a major blow. This unexpected turn of events was a significant setback. Despite this, Antonia's relatives continued to seek justice with the support of the public. Victims who were initially silent about their experiences began speaking out after Antonia's case gained widespread public attention. Within a month, 8 more girls came forward to the police, claiming they too had been harassed and assaulted by Martín. They had previously remained silent, fearing they would be condemned and censured. One of the victims was just 13 years old at the time of the assault. As more girls who suffered at the hands of Martín began contacting the police, he was eventually taken into custody. Martín was arrested in June 2020 and held at Temuco City Prison on suspicion of committing assaults between 2011 and 2019. However, Martín was released on his own recognizance less than a month after his lawyer intervened, and was allowed to remain free for the duration of the investigation. Furthermore, several lawsuits filed by the injured girls were rejected due to the statute of limitations having expired. There was a high likelihood that many cases would be disregarded. Out of 8 appeals, only 2 were registered by the court. The release of Martín from custody and the rejection of the victim's claims sparked widespread outrage. Protests and rallies erupted nationwide, with thousands demanding justice. In response, the prosecutor's office re-examined the case and pushed for a change in Martín's bail conditions, seeking to return him to custody. Meanwhile, the statute of limitations was lifted for all cases of violence committed by Martín. During his trial in February 2021, his social media messages were revealed, in which he boasted about his actions to friends. It was also discovered that Martín kept a collection of his victims' underwear at home, taken as trophies. This collection included items from victims who had previously reported him to the court, as well as a belonging of Antonia's. On August 26, 2021, Martine was charged with 9 counts of crimes involving sexual misconduct. 3 of the victims were minors when the incidents occurred. The Antonia family appealed to the public to speak out against violence and bring those responsible to justice. The trial began in June 2022, allowing Martine's lawyers sufficient time to prepare. They presented witness statements and surveillance footage showing that Antonia left with the defendant voluntarily and did not attempt to resist him. The defense challenged the testimonies of other victims, but in August 2022, the court delivered a guilty verdict against Martine. He was convicted of 8 crimes involving sexual misconduct and causing Antonia's nervous breakdown, which ultimately led to her death. Martine was sentenced to 20 years in prison. However, his lawyers, led by Pinus, promptly filed an appeal. On December 29, the Supreme Court ordered a new trial. In March 2023, Martine's case was assigned to the Public Defender's Office. During the new trial, Martine maintained his innocence, attributing the events leading to Antonia's death to the large quantity of alcohol they had consumed together. Despite this, on July 7, 2023, Martine was found guilty again. The court reduced his initial 20-year sentence to 17 years, considering the 3 years he had already spent in prison. He had only 14 years left to serve. However, Antonia's family expressed dissatisfaction with this decision in an official press release made by her father. They noted that no punishment could bring back their daughter. During the ongoing lawsuits, Antonia's family and other victims affected by Martine's actions joined forces with public figures to advocate for women's rights. Together, they worked to amend the criminal code, specifically the sections related to sexual offenses. Their objective was to protect the rights of victims of harassment and sexual violence. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Karen Buckley. Karen Buckley, a 24-year-old student, went missing after a night out with friends at a nightclub on April 11th. Born in 1991 in Cork, Ireland, Karen was the youngest child and only daughter of John and Marion Buckley. Growing up, Karen was known for her kind and caring nature, always willing to lend a helping hand. This trait greatly influenced her career choices. After graduating from St. Mary's Secondary School in Mallow, Karen pursued a degree in nursing at the University of Limerick. Her interest in occupational therapy eventually led her to Glasgow, where she enrolled in a master's program at Caledonian University. Karen arrived in Glasgow in January 2015 and moved into an apartment with 3 other female students who were also new to the area. On April 11, 2015, Karen and her flatmates went to a nightclub about 2 kilometers from their apartment. They arrived around 11:45 p.m. and had a great time. At about 1 a.m., Karen told her friend she was going to the restroom and would return soon. She took her purse and left her jacket on the table where the group was sitting. Her friends continued to enjoy themselves while Karen was away. After a while, they realized Karen had been gone longer than expected and should have returned by then. However, Karen was nowhere to be found. One of her friends searched the club for her but couldn't locate her. Trying to contact her by phone was also unsuccessful. She came with thought maybe Karen had gone home, but it was strange that Karen didn't tell anyone and left her jacket behind. The only explanation they could think of was that Karen might have met someone at the club and left with that person. With this thought in mind, they went to bed. However, when they woke up around noon, Karen's neighbors were surprised to find that she had not returned home. They called and messaged Karen on social media, but she didn't respond. Although they had only known Karen for a few months, they knew that this behavior was out of character for her. Instead of coming up with alternative explanations to reassure themselves, they decided to report her disappearance to the police and inform the Buckley family about what had happened. The Scottish police acted swiftly to find Karen, and her disappearance was publicized in the media. Her parents urged anyone with information to come forward. Meanwhile, detectives reviewed footage from the club's cameras and found evidence of Karen interacting with a mystery man. Within 36 hours, on April 13th, the man was identified as 21-year-old Alexander Pacto and was brought in for questioning. He confirmed that he had met Karen at the club and they had gone to his apartment on Dorchester Avenue, about 3 kilometers away. Alexander also revealed that they had been intimate. Around 4 a.m., Karen decided to leave Alexander's apartment and head home, despite his invitation to stay until morning. Alexander mentioned that during their intimate encounter, Karen accidentally hit her head on the bed corner, resulting in an injury and leaving blood marks on the sheets. The police reacted ambivalently to this information. While Alexander seemed genuinely open, he also appeared to be anticipating and justifying potential evidence that might be discovered in his apartment. On April 13th, a man reported finding a woman's purse to the police. Upon further investigation, it was revealed that the purse was discovered in the park near Alexander's residence, and it belonged to Karen. The purse contained her phone and identification documents. This new evidence lent credibility to Alexander's account of events, suggesting that something might have happened to Karen after she left his apartment. The search for Karen persisted, with hundreds of police officers thoroughly searching parks, forests, bodies of water, and abandoned buildings for any potential clues that could aid in the investigation. At that point, Alexander Pacto was the primary suspect, being the last person to have seen Karen. However, investigators kept his identity confidential and did not disclose any information about him. 2 days after Karen went missing, police entering Alexander's apartment with a search warrant, police were immediately struck by the strong smell of bleach. They also observed that the mattress on the bed was the wrong size. Small, dark red spots were discovered on the bed and in the bathroom, and samples were taken for analysis. Additionally, a toolbox and a large quantity of cleaning supplies were found in the apartment. A police dog trained to detect human remains indicated a potential find near Alexander Pacto's car. While awaiting a search warrant, detectives discovered that Alexander had taken his car to be cleaned the previous day, but the job appeared to have been done poorly. Upon searching the vehicle, investigators found small, dark red spots on the inside of the passenger door and sent samples to the lab for analysis. As the investigation progressed, suspicions mounted that Karen might not be alive, but the search for her continued unabated. After journalists uncovered the suspect's identity, a photo of Alexander Pacto appeared on the front page of a local newspaper the following day. This unexpected move by the press ultimately proved helpful to the investigation. A man recognized Alexander's photo in the newspaper and contacted the police, offering valuable information. He claimed to have worked with Alexander in the past and revealed that Alexander rented a warehouse on a farm outside Glasgow. This farm was approximately 9 kilometers from Alexander's apartment. The police pursued every lead and investigated this new information. The farm owner verified that Alexander indeed rented a storage space from him for £10 a week. Upon inspection of the storage space, the police discovered a 200-liter drum containing Karen's body, which had been dissolved in caustic soda, a highly corrosive alkaline substance capable of breaking down organic materials. They also found a bonfire with remnants of a mattress that Pacto had attempted to burn. On the same day, April 15th, the suspect in Karen Buckley's case was arrested. Faced with substantial evidence, Alexander admitted to taking Karen's life, but claimed it was in self-defense. Police reconstructed a timeline of events based on evidence and Alexander's testimony. On the night of April 11th to 12th, Karen left the club around 1 a.m. The reason for her departure remains unclear. Her friends reported no argument, stating Karen said she was going to the bathroom and would return. It is also unclear why Karen left her jacket behind, even if she had decided to go home. Officers investigating the case reviewed 1,900 hours of surveillance footage. One recording showed Karen encountering Alexander after leaving a club. They walked together towards his car, where it's believed he offered to drive her home. However, once inside the car, Alexander attacked Karen. He struck her 14 times on the head with a large wrench, resulting in her death. Investigators found dark red stains in the car, bathroom, and on Alexander's bed, later confirmed as Karen's dried blood. After disposing of her body, Alexander planned his next moves, starting with getting rid of Karen's purse, which was later recovered and given to the police. Around 2 a.m., he returned home and did something that shocked the detectives. He took the Karen out of the car and carried it into his apartment. Later, at 8 a.m., he used his phone to search online for information about caustic soda. He then visited a shopping center where he purchased 6 liters of caustic soda, a respirator mask, and gloves at 9:42 a.m. To get rid of Karen's body, Alexander realized 6 liters of caustic soda wouldn't be enough. He bought more from another store on his way home and put the body in the bathtub. However, since his neighbor would return home around 8 p.m. and he wouldn't have enough time, he wrapped the body in a blanket and hid it in his bedroom. The next day, April 13th, Alexander threw a wrench into the River Clyde, later found by divers. He then visited a nearby shopping center, about 1.5 miles away, where he sought a consultant's advice on a product that could remove bloodstains from a mattress. He also purchased 2 padlocks that day. He took Karen's belongings to a farm and burned them. Then, he bought a barrel and took it to a rented warehouse. There, he poured in caustic soda and locked the gate with 2 new padlocks. Later that day, at 6 p.m., police visited his home and took him in for questioning. Alexander confessed to his crime, but his motive was unclear. He claimed he killed Karen in self-defense during a car argument, but investigators did not believe him. They thought he was trying to justify his actions. Police suspected that Alexander killed Karen to cover up another crime and then got rid of her body. However, the body was too decomposed to determine if Karen had suffered violence before dying. In September 2015, Alexander Pacto was found guilty and given a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 23 years. Through his lawyer, he apologized to Karen's family and expressed remorse. Alexander told his lawyer that he was too drunk on the night of the incident to remember why he killed Karen. If he had not pleaded guilty, he would have been eligible for parole in 25 years instead of 23. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Rowan Ford. Rowan Ford was born on April 11, 1998, in San Diego, California. Her parents divorced when she was young, and her mother, Colleen, moved with her to a small town called Stella in Missouri. Later, her mom met a man named David, and they got married. Colleen had several children from a previous marriage, and soon after their wedding, she and David had a daughter together. Altogether, Rowan had 2 sisters and 2 brothers, and they shared a very close bond. She spent a lot of time outdoors, riding her bike around town, enjoying swimming, and indulging in her passion for drawing. She also liked going to Sunday school at the local church, where she always volunteered to help other kids who had some issues with their tasks. In November 2007, when Rowan was 9 years old, she was in the 4th grade at the local elementary school. Her mom worked the night shift at a store, while her stepdad spent most of the day on the farm, which made Rowan often fend for herself, making her very independent. On November 2nd, she stayed home alone as usual. Her mom went to work, and her stepdad hadn't returned from the farm yet. The next morning, around 9 a.m., Colleen came home from her night shift and checked Rowan's room, but her daughter wasn't there. She asked her husband where her daughter was, and he said she had asked him if she could have a sleepover at a friend's house, and he had let her go. He didn't even ask the friend's name because their town was very small, and he wasn't worried about anything happening to her. But Colleen started to worry and decided to check with all of Rowan's friends. Since there were only a few streets in their town, it didn't take long, but none of them had seen her, and she hadn't stayed over at any of their houses, which made her mother even more concerned. Colleen searched the whole town but couldn't find her daughter. She went back home and told her husband that Rowan was nowhere to be found. She asked him to call the police and report her missing, but he reassured her that everything was fine and that she would come home soon. After waiting for several more hours with no sign of Rowan, Colleen took matters into her own hands and dialed 911 herself. The local sheriff immediately organized a search operation. He went to their house to speak with David, and as he was the last person to see Rowan before she disappeared, David said that on that evening, while he was working on the farm with his colleague Christopher, their mutual friend Nathan came by. They all decided to go to David's place to have some drinks and play pool. They stopped by the store, bought some alcohol, and went to David's house, where they spent several hours. Later in the night, Christopher asked Nathan to drive him home to the neighboring town, where his trailer was. They persuaded David to join them to continue the fun. Before leaving the house, he checked on Rowan in her room, seeing that she was asleep. David left with his friends, and they stopped by the store again to grab more alcohol and headed to Christopher's trailer, where they continued drinking for about an hour. After that, David decided to head home and asked Nathan to give him a ride. Nathan agreed but chose to take back roads instead of the main highway. By that time Nathan was quite drunk and didn't want to risk encountering the police. Nathan dropped David off and drove home. David went straight to bed. Soon after, he was awakened by Rowan, who asked if she could sleep over at a friend's house. Without much thought, he agreed and fell back asleep. Police approached this story with some skepticism. What puzzled them most was the fact that a 9-year-old girl decided to go to her friend's house in the middle of the night, and her stepfather let her go without even asking which friend she was talking about. The sheriff considered that David might be hiding something or directly involved in Rowan's disappearance, but he had no evidence to support this theory. Police searched the town and its surroundings until late at night. Local residents immediately joined the search, as they all knew Rowan's family and wanted to help. The population of Stella was only about 150 people, so news of her disappearance spread throughout the county. People were used to being able to let their children play outside without a worry, as nothing ever happened in such a quiet place. But now that Rowan vanished without a trace, and the police were unable to find her for a whole day, the residents of Stella were in a state of panic. The search for Rowan yielded no results on the first day. However, the investigation progressed on November 4th when the police spoke with Christopher in a neighboring town. He corroborated David's account, but revealed that David had not contacted him to inform him of Rowan's disappearance. Christopher stated he had not spoken with Rowan or her friends since that evening. Despite an expanded search with more volunteers, the police failed to find Rowan or any clues about her disappearance. The following day, the FBI joined the investigation while the local police continued searching the town and surrounding areas. As a result of growing skepticism towards David's account, detectives started focusing on a potential abduction. They spoke with all of Rowan's friends and verified that none of them had seen her on the night she went missing. As investigators questioned David, his account raised even more suspicions. David's details were inconsistent and contradictory. He altered the timeline of his whereabouts that night on multiple occasions. Additionally, David speculates that it is possible that Rowan left without his permission, which makes his story even more suspicious. During their investigation, FBI agents found out that David had borrowed his mother's car on the night of Rowan's disappearance, a detail he initially left out when questioned by the police. This new information led the authorities to seize both his mother's car and his own pickup truck for forensic examination. But unfortunately, no evidence was discovered. As part of the investigation, detectives wanted to speak with Christopher and Nathan again, since both had been with David that evening. Christopher was invited to the police station for further questioning, where he recounted the same story as before. He also agreed to take a polygraph test, which showed no signs of dishonesty. After leaving the police station and returning to work, Christopher noticed Sheriff Clark's car and signaled for him to stop. As the sheriff of Whitton, where Christopher lived, Clark had known him since childhood. Sheriff Clark was close friends with Christopher's foster parents and was someone Christopher had always looked up to and sought advice from in times of need. Sheriff Clark met with Christopher to discuss Rowan's disappearance. Although familiar with the case, Clark hadn't been directly involved since the investigation was led by the Stella Department. During their conversation, Clark noticed that Christopher was acting strangely, which led him to suspect that Christopher might be hiding something. Given the gravity of the situation and Rowan's uncertain fate, Clark shared his concerns with the FBI. His call prompted investigators to consider the possibility that Christopher might be withholding crucial information that could link Rowan's stepfather to her disappearance. They wondered if Christopher's actions were directed by Rowan's stepfather to lie, and whether Christopher feared being seen as an accomplice if he told the truth. Sheriff Clark told the FBI agents that he had a close relationship with Christopher and offered to help persuade him to cooperate. That evening, Christopher visited Colleen's house to ask about the search progress. FBI agents also arrived to speak with Colleen again and saw Christopher there. They asked him questions, and he repeated his previous account. However, Christopher then mentioned for the first time that he didn't rule out David's possible involvement in Rowan's disappearance. He expressed his willingness to help uncover the truth, even if it was terrible, and suggested wearing a wire to talk to David and try to get him to confess. The detectives decided against this approach. Instead, they asked Christopher to suggest locations where David might have hidden Rowan's body. Christopher provided several locations, which the police searched the next morning. Meanwhile, FBI agents questioned David again, but he continued to deny any involvement. Detectives searched Christopher's home for leads, but the search yielded no results. Meanwhile, Christopher visited the sheriff's office to discuss his encounter with the FBI with Clark. During their conversation, the sheriff sensed that Christopher was holding back information. After their meeting, Clark reached out to the detectives again, suggesting that Christopher might be withholding crucial information that helped prove David's involvement in the case. The FBI agents asked the sheriff to persuade Christopher to open up, as he had been in regular contact with Clark to discuss the case. It seemed that Christopher wanted to share important details but was hesitant to do so for unknown reasons. The following day, November 7th, the police asked Christopher to return to the station. They requested his permission to search a safe located in David's house, where Christopher had been living temporarily and still had some belongings. Christopher agreed to the search and also allowed the police to search his trailer and car. Additionally, Christopher voluntarily provided a DNA sample and agreed to answer the detectives' questions again. During the questioning, he was asked to confirm David's story, but this time, Christopher revealed that his friend's account was not entirely accurate. The investigators then pressed him to disclose what really happened that evening. Christopher became agitated when the police treated him like a suspect in Rowan's disappearance. He refused to continue the conversation and left the station after warning the detectives that he might hire a lawyer. Later that evening, Christopher met with Sheriff Clark to express his concerns about the detectives' behavior. Clark acknowledged Christopher's right to remain silent but explained that the police were doing everything possible to find Rowan. Christopher stated that he would no longer cooperate with the detectives and would only speak with Clark if he had any further information to share. Clark continued to encourage Christopher to open up, and eventually, Christopher broke down in tears, claiming that he loved Rowan and would never harm her. During his time living with the David family, Christopher formed a close bond with Rowan and the other children. They grew to treat him like one of their own, even affectionately referring to him as Uncle Christopher. Sheriff Clark realized that Christopher was on the verge of revealing crucial information, but just as he was about to open up, a visitor arrived at the police station, briefly distracting Clark and causing Christopher to leave. Sheriff Clark reached out to the FBI, updating them on his conversation with Christopher. Clark explained that Christopher was almost ready to disclose what he knew, but warned that pressuring him too hard could lead to him becoming defensive and seeking the help of a lawyer. Clark recommended giving Christopher time to reflect, and the detectives agreed. The search for Rowan continued the following day but yielded no results. However, a new clue came on November 9th, exactly 1 week after her disappearance. Search teams converged on a remote area near the town of Powell, about 10 miles from Stella, and made a significant discovery in the fields and woods, a large pit in the ground. When authorities searched the area, they found Rowan's body hidden under leaves and debris. She was not wearing any clothing from the waist down except for a pair of stockings. A medical examination revealed signs of strangulation and evidence of a sexual assault. After the discovery, FBI agents reached out to Sheriff Clark, asking him to speak with Christopher again, hoping Christopher would now be more forthcoming. Sheriff Clark learned that earlier that morning, Christopher had visited the station, looking for him, and told other officers that he needed to speak with Clark urgently. Sheriff Clark then began searching for Christopher, checking all his usual locations, but he was nowhere to be found. This continued until Christopher contacted Sheriff Clark himself, sounding distressed and asking if he was being followed. Christopher explained that after hearing about Rowan's body, he had driven around town to clear his head and noticed a gray car following him. Sheriff Clark assures Christopher that he knows nothing about the surveillance and suggests they meet in person. When they met, Christopher appeared nervous and expressed concerns for his safety. He feared that with Rowan's body found, he might be accused of murder and that someone might seek revenge against him. Clark took Christopher to the police station, and he said that now when the case had been classified as a homicide, it was time for Christopher to reveal everything he knew. However, when Clark asked Christopher to share what David had done to Rowan, Christopher became emotional and hesitant to talk at the station. He explained that there were too many people around and suggested they move to a quieter location. Clark agreed, and they drove to a small bridge a few miles outside of town. Once they arrived, Christopher asked Clark to handcuff him. Clark was surprised but tried to reassure Christopher that it wasn't necessary. Christopher insists that what he is about to say will change everything and that Clark will then have to arrest him. Christopher then began recounting the events of that night. He told Clark that he, Nathan, and David had gone to his trailer to continue drinking. Later, his friends decided it was time to head home. Nathan gave David a ride, and they chose to take back roads to avoid the police. Christopher had shocked Clark that he had intended to sexually assault Rowan. To carry out his plan, Christopher took advantage of the time when his friends were busy taking a detour through the field. He drove straight to David's house via the main highway. Under the cover of darkness, he slipped into Rowan's room, picked her up, and quietly transported her to his vehicle, carefully avoiding detection as she slept. When they reached his trailer, he sexually assaulted Rowan. This was interrupted when Rowan regained consciousness and tried her best to free herself, but to no avail. During the crime, Christopher took precautions to avoid recognition, deliberately choosing to keep the lights off and maintain his silence. He originally planned to return Rowan to her home under the guise of innocence, but under the illumination of a bright moon, Rowan finally laid eyes on Christopher as he transported her from the trailer. He grabbed a rope, resorted to force to resolve his predicament, and took Rowan's life with his bare hands. He frantically thought of ways to cover up his crime. He got in his car and began driving around the county. pondering methods of disposing of the body. He then remembered a large pit near a neighboring town and headed in that direction. When he arrived, he dumped Rowan's body in the hole and attempted to cover it with tree branches. Returning to the trailer, Christopher discovered traces of Rowan's blood on his clothes and mattress. He also realized he needed to dispose of her pants, underwear, and the rope used to kill her. He gathered these items and placed them in a large barrel, intending to burn them. However, he quickly reconsidered, realizing that a large fire would likely attract unwanted attention. Instead, Christopher dragged the barrel into a shed, closed the door, and started the fire inside. This revelation shocked Clark, who had previously suspected David of committing the crime and believed Christopher was withholding information. It was difficult for Clark to accept that a man he had known for nearly 20 years, a man with 3 young children of his own, was capable of such brutality. Although Christopher appears to be a good-natured man, his true nature is much more worrying. After finishing his story, Christopher willingly went to the police station with Clark. Once there, Christopher repeated his confession to the FBI agents and was subsequently arrested for murder. He also gave the authorities permission to search his trailer and car. As he concluded his confession, Christopher expressed regret over his actions and stated that he had cried uncontrollably the following day. The detectives then informed David about Christopher's confession. Given David's suspicious behavior and inconsistent statements, they suspected he might be covering for his friend. However, during interrogation, David revealed a shocking new testimony. David claimed that when he found Rowan missing from her room, he suspected Christopher might have taken her. He took his mother's car and drove to Christopher's trailer. He found Rowan lying on the bed. Christopher leaned towards her. Instead of rescuing Rowan, David joined in and also sexually assaulted her. He then helped Christopher kill her and dispose of her body. David reported that during that traumatic incident, his brain went into shock, and he had no memory of the night for several days. The detectives, surprised by this new information, re-questioned Christopher to verify David's claim. However, Christopher maintained that David was not involved and that incident unfolded as he had initially described. The inconsistencies puzzled the detectives, but Christopher's account still matched incident that had occurred. Medical examination revealed that the victim was strangled with a thin rope, a detail that only the killer would be aware of. A search of the trailer led to the discovery of a barrel containing ashes, and hair similar to Rowan's was found in Christopher's car. Although investigators were still uncertain about the truthfulness of each man's account, both David and Christopher made incriminating statements. As a result, David was also arrested, and the case were sent to court for further proceedings. During the trial, Christopher requested that his statements be excluded from the case, arguing that he was not aware they could be used against him and that the police had violated his rights. However, the judge rejected this request, as all of Christopher's conversations with investigators were voluntary. Christopher also attempted to present mitigating circumstances, citing his difficult childhood as a factor. He had been shuffled between biological and foster parents from a young age, which had a significant impact on him. Despite these efforts, Christopher was unable to avoid punishment. In 2012, 5 years after the murder, Christopher was sentenced to death. He appealed the sentence, but was unsuccessful. In contrast, David's situation was more complex. Although he admitted to assaulting and killing Rowan, his account conflicted with Christopher's statements, creating a significant problem. If the prosecution had charged David with murder, it could have potentially led to Christopher's conviction being overturned, allowing David to avoid accountability as well. However, due to the lack of concrete evidence, such as DNA, in fact, they were still uncertain about David's involvement. Although it was possible that David might have collaborated with Christopher in committing the crime, there was no supporting evidence for this theory. To minimize the risk of overturning Christopher's sentence, the prosecution made the difficult decision to reduce David's charges. As a result, David pleaded guilty to 2 lesser charges: child endangerment and obstruction of justice. David received an 11 years prison sentence, with a minimum of 5 years to be served. This outcome sparked widespread outrage, as many felt that if David was indeed involved in the murder, his punishment was disproportionately lenient. Unfortunately, this sentence is now final, and it is unlikely that David will face retrial for this case. Christopher remains in prison awaiting execution, but it's uncertain whether the death penalty will be carried out due to the often lengthy time between sentencing and execution, which can span decades, meaning he might spend the rest of his life in prison instead. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Graciela Graciela. Graciela Graciela was born on October 6, 19, in Mexico, to a working-class family who sought a better future for their children. To achieve this, her parents made the decision to immigrate to the United States, ultimately settling in Hermiston, Oregon. As Graciela was very young at the time of the move, she has no recollection of the challenges associated with relocating. Upon reaching school age, Graciela attended Umatilla High School, an institution that predominantly served students from low-income backgrounds. The school provided all students with free meals, reflecting the socioeconomic status of its student body, of which 66% were Hispanic. It was here that Graciela's sociable nature and innate charm enabled her to effortlessly form friendships among her peers. After graduating, she proceeded to enroll in the business department at Blue Mountain College. From a young age, Graciela had always dreamed of becoming a hairstylist and owning her own beauty salon. With determination and hard work, she believed she could make her dreams a reality. By February 2006, she had achieved her goal and became the owner of Cuz Beauty Salon. Graciela's talent and charisma quickly made her a well-known figure in society. As the salon's owner, she always presented herself well, which added to the salon's positive image. Her passion for her job and understanding of the latest beauty trends ensured a steady stream of clients. Over time, some of these clients became close friends, who were always welcome at her home. Graciela was highly respected in the town, not only for her professional success but also for her interesting and happy personal life. Her first love, with whom she had 2 daughters, Annabelle and Gabriella, also known as Gabby, was someone she met in her youth. Although the relationship didn't last long, and the father of her children left the family, Graciela didn't let this setback hold her back. Instead, she focused on self-improvement and continued to move forward as a single mother. Graciela later earned a degree in cosmetology. She then met a kind-hearted man of Mexican descent named Romero Sanchez, and they got married. Her children from a previous relationship reported that she never regretted this decision. Her husband was caring not only to her but also to her children, treating them as his own. The family later welcomed 2 more children, Arthur and Jacob. Although he had biological sons, Graciela's husband still affectionately referred to Annabelle and Gabriella as his girls. Gabby considered her stepfather to be her real father, as he consistently supported, protected, and cared for them. The couple prioritized keeping their family united and happy, raising 4 children together. This did not deter Graciela from pursuing her passion. Instead, she would often take her children with her to professional meetings. The family developed a lovely tradition of traveling together, exploring new cities, local attractions, and cultural features. They also prioritized staying connected to their roots, frequently visiting Mexico and enjoying quality time together. Everyone made a genuine effort to make each other happy. However, after 17 years of marriage, the couple decided to separate. Graciela and her ex-husband chose not to burden each other with their dwindling feelings, opting to preserve the respectful relationship they had built over the years. Even after the divorce, they maintained a warm and strong connection. The father remained involved in the children's lives, regularly seeing them and sharing custody of their youngest son with Graciela. The other children were grown and lived on their own, but they remained close to their parents. They would get together to celebrate holidays and often sought each other's advice. Graciela handled her divorce well, remaining optimistic and confident, thanks in part to her ex-husband's kind and understanding behavior during this challenging time. On November 9, 2019, Romero made an unexpected visit to Annabelle, Graciela's eldest daughter. Annabelle was surprised to see her mother's new husband show up unexpectedly. Romero told Annabelle that Graciela had disappeared. According to Romero, he and Graciela had met with Jacob the previous night. Afterward, Romero returned home and went to bed beside Graciela, who was already asleep. However, when he woke up in the morning, Graciela was gone. He searched the house but couldn't find her. Romero tried to contact Graciela by calling and texting her, but she didn't respond. He went to Annabelle's place hoping she might have some information about Graciela's disappearance. Annabelle, however, had no idea where her mother was. She was shocked not only by the news of her mother's disappearance but also by Romero's reaction. He was in tears and seemed genuinely upset. Annabelle found this odd because Romero had never shown any strong emotions around them before, only indifference. Romero mentioned that Graciela had been acting strangely and might have found someone else. He admitted she might have needed a break from their relationship and wasn't sure if she was truly happy with him. However, Annabelle found his words insincere and his tears overly dramatic. She started to worry about her mother and found Romero's behavior suspicious. Romero had previously avoided talking to Graciela's children, but suddenly reached out to them. After he left, Annabelle told the rest of the family what happened. They gathered at Graciela's house to figure out what was going on. Her car was still parked in the driveway, which was unusual since she would have likely taken it if she were leaving Romero. The house was also spotlessly tidy, which was out of character for Graciela, who preferred a more creative and chaotic space. If she were planning to leave, her belongings would have been scattered around the room. Graciela spent a considerable amount of time in front of the mirror, carefully selecting an outfit for the day. However, she surprisingly left all her treasured jewelry at home, including her favorite rings and necklaces that she wore daily. This unusual behavior raised concerns among her family members, who couldn't help but imagine worst-case scenarios, including the possibility of her fleeing. While searching the house, Gabby stumbled upon something peculiar, a large, heavy blanket in the washing machine. This was unusual because their mother, Graciela, always emphasized the importance of not overloading appliances. It was likely that Romero, who normally didn't participate in household chores, had washed the blanket. This sparked suspicion that he might be trying to conceal something. It was later discovered that along with Graciela, several important items had gone missing from the house, including her passport, driver's license, and mobile phone. On November 11th, Annabelle went to the police station to report her mother, Graciela, missing. However, she was surprised to find that Romero, Graciela's husband, had not informed the police about her disappearance, despite knowing about it since November 9th or possibly earlier. As a result, Annabelle became the first person to file a missing person report for her mother. Romero's distant personality had been a concern for Graciela's family since they met him. Graciela had met Romero at her beauty salon, where he was a client, after her divorce. Their initial friendship eventually developed into a romantic relationship. However, when Graciela introduced Romero to her family, they noticed his aloof and cold demeanor. Annabelle and her sister, Gabby, tried several times to connect with Romero, but he did not reciprocate, leaving Graciela's children puzzled by his behavior. They initially attributed it to individual personality differences, especially compared to their mother's previous relationships. They were eager to understand their mother's partner and what motivated him. At times, he seemed strange and aloof to them, and they struggled to comprehend how someone as lively and joyful as their mother could be drawn to someone so serious and reserved. Despite their reservations, they respected her decision. When their mother shared the news of her upcoming wedding, everyone rallied around her, particularly the girls, who wanted to see her happy and loved. On the wedding day, guests couldn't help but notice Romero's haughty demeanor and restraint. Some even perceived him as excessively possessive, as he dominated the bride's attention. When Graciella's young children came to congratulate the newlyweds, Romero responded with disdain rather than warmth and affection, making it clear that he didn't want to share his wife's attention with anyone, not even her own family. After that, Graciella's relatives struggled to hide their genuine opinions about Romero. Annabelle even went so far as to say she didn't consider him a stepfather, let alone a father figure. The family simply wanted to have a normal relationship, like those found in any civilized household. Following the wedding, Graciella and Romero moved in together, along with her youngest son Jacob, into Graciella's home. Jacob shared that shortly after the wedding, Romero started behaving as if he was the sole owner of the house. The boy recalled that the initial honeymoon phase was brief, and soon the family started to fall apart. He observed that his mother initially tried to establish personal boundaries, but being non-confrontational, she quickly gave in to Romero's demands. This seemed to suit Romero, who had a quick temper and never apologized first. To avoid creating tension in the household, Graciella often conceded to Romero's wishes. As time went on, it seemed she realized she had rushed into the marriage without fully thinking it through. In private conversations, Graciella confessed to feeling trapped and suffocated in the relationship. Her husband exerted control over her, never allowing her to go anywhere alone. Despite this, she never expressed any desire to leave the abusive relationship, suggesting she was still in love with Romero. Everyone realized that Graciella was in a relationship with the wrong person. It became apparent that her partner, Romero, was jobless and financially dependent on her. The Graciella family, who valued hard work, found it frustrating that Romero was always by Graciella's side without any apparent reason. Romero was a master manipulator who kept a close eye on Graciella, monitoring her interactions, including her friendships with other women. He would either prevent her from going out or show up unexpectedly, as if checking on her loyalty. His extreme jealousy was suffocating. Graciella felt embarrassed by his behavior, which led her to isolate herself socially, only interacting with her family. This had a negative impact on her professional life, as her job required frequent client meetings and attending industry events. Those close to Graciella noticed a significant change in her demeanor. She looked sad, worn out, and had lost her usual cheerfulness. It was clear that she was unhappy. Even her children observed the changes in her mood and appearance, as well as her loss of independence. They discussed their concerns among themselves and concluded that, although they didn't like Romero, he was Graciella's choice, and they had to respect her decisions. Other relatives shared the family's distrust of Romero. However, no one knew how to intervene or offer support. The couple's issues were serious enough to require professional help. Gabby had once suggested this to her mother, but Graciella insisted on handling her personal life independently. In 2018, Graciella suddenly announced that she would relocate her beauty salon to her home, citing convenience. Her family was skeptical, as she had never mentioned this plan before, despite running the salon for 12 years. Some clients noted that Romero often hung around the salon, creating tension and disrupting the usually warm atmosphere. While some thought Graciella made the move to solve a problem, others suspected that her jealous husband was behind the decision. Despite the initial doubts, Graciella remained enthusiastic about the change, saying it allowed her to spend more time with Jacob and Romero. By the end of 2018, she and her husband were remodeling a room for the salon, but the project took longer than expected and wasn't completed until May 2019. Although the salon was closed temporarily, Graciella's reputation remained intact, and rumors of the studio's reopening attracted a long queue of clients, including new ones, months in advance. Graciella was thrilled with her professional success but became increasingly private about her personal life. Return to the moment before of Graciella's disappearance. Another incident raised concerns about Graciella's safety. She asked her daughter Gabby to pick her up, which was unusual. But she claimed everything was fine and said she was just having a disagreement with her husband. When they met up, they spent time together and Graciella seemed to relax. She smiled and told Gabby not to worry, saying that couples' arguments are normal and can actually bring people closer together. Despite this, Gabby couldn't shake off her worries and remained uneasy about her mother's situation. After Annabelle contacted the police, the relationship between Graciella's family and Romero rapidly deteriorated. He offered an explanation for his wife's disappearance, suggesting that she might have wanted some time alone or could have left with another man, and he believed she would soon return. This was his standard response to anyone inquiring about the situation. However, the police took the report seriously and initiated an investigation, considering the possibility that Graciella could have been a victim of a crime. They began by searching her home, where they found that only a few personal items were missing, with nothing else seeming out of the ordinary. The police also interviewed Graciella's children, her husband, and others close to the family, including her ex-husband. Although everyone expressed skepticism about Romero's behavior, the investigation did not uncover any significant information. Romero cooperated with the detectives, allowing them to search his home, participating in interrogations, providing his DNA, and undergoing a polygraph test. Despite his cooperation, the police did not have sufficient grounds to arrest him, so the investigation continued. Analysis of Graciella's phone records revealed her last known location was near a bridge in Washington on November 9 at 12:30 p.m., when the signal stopped after her phone was turned off. Her bank accounts and social media remained inactive. Despite questioning hundreds of witnesses and checking all her frequent locations, investigators found no signs of her. The investigation deemed her disappearance suspicious due to the complete lack of evidence. For months into the investigation, the Hermiston police publicly stated that they had no confirmed information about Graciella's last sighting. Although Romero didn't report Graciella missing, the authorities didn't accuse him of anything. The police's stance frustrated Graciella's relatives, causing them to reduce communication with law enforcement. The family eventually stopped receiving weekly updates, forcing Graciella's children to contact the police station directly for information. As of March 2020, there were no new developments in Graciella's case. In an effort to revive the investigation, Graciella's family reached out to the media, hoping to raise public awareness and gather information. They believed even small details could be crucial. Gabby, a family member, expressed the family's frustration and disappointment with the police's lack of progress in the case. The Graciella family urged investigators to focus on finding Graciella, as they suspected foul play due to the state of her belongings and the unusual circumstances at home. It was unclear who would harm her, as she had no known enemies. Her family knew she wouldn't leave without contacting them, and the lack of communication suggested something was seriously wrong. The family also requested a new detective team, citing concerns of bias and collusion with Romero, whom they believed was somehow connected to the case. The family pointed out numerous inconsistencies in the investigation. It was found that Romero's phone had been turned off on the day his wife went missing, and his actions didn't seem like those of someone who was worried about a loved one disappearing suddenly. The Graciella family asked for Romero to be arrested. Police Chief Jason Edmiston quickly responded to these claims. He agreed that Mrs. Graciella's disappearance seemed suspicious and might involve something criminal. He said this was just one idea, but promised that the investigation would stay fair and be based on evidence and facts. Edmiston also denied that Romero had any connections to the police that might affect the case. Edmiston mentioned that false information was spreading and making the investigation harder. He said the case was ongoing and that some information had to be kept secret. The police also asked the FBI for help. Edmiston expressed frustration that people were criticizing the police without understanding how complicated the law is. At the same time, Gabby started a fundraiser to hire a private investigator. This move was seen as criticism of how the police were handling the case, suggesting they weren't doing their job well. 1 year after Graciella's disappearance, her family and friends held a memorial event to honor her memory and pray for her safe return. They lit candles and posted signs outside the police station, urging authorities to continue searching for her. In September 2023, a significant development in the case occurred when Romero Sanchez, Graciella's husband, was severely injured in an attack. There was speculation that Mason Graciella, Graciella's brother, was involved in the incident, but details and any potential consequences for Mason were not disclosed. It appeared that Graciella's family had become frustrated with the police's lack of progress in investigating Romero, leading to a potentially frightening outcome. Graciella's disappearance remains an unsolved mystery, leaving her family in unbearable uncertainty that's taking a devastating toll on their health. Her children are left with only prayers, hoping for clarity and justice, unsure if she's alive. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Emmett Corrigan. Ashley Harmon was a vibrant and intelligent person who experienced a challenging time when her parents divorced at the age of 9. During this period, she took on a maternal role, caring for her 5 siblings and protecting them. Ashley's faith was the cornerstone of her life. As a devout Mormon and a member of the Church of Jesus Christ and the Latter-day Saints, she turned to her faith in God for strength and comfort during difficult times. Her unwavering belief provided her with a sense of peace, resilience, and determination, enabling her to overcome obstacles and face challenges with courage. In 2003, while studying human development at Utah State, Ashley met Emmett, a philosophy student. Emmett, like Ashley, had experienced the pain of his parents' divorce at a young age. However, he found solace in the Mormon faith and was baptized into the Church of Jesus Christ and the Latter-day Saints at 17. Ashley was immediately drawn to Emmett's charm, and he reciprocated her feelings. Emmett was immediately smitten with Ashley's intelligence when they first met, and he quickly realized she was the one he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. He confided in his closest friends about his feelings, and their relationship blossomed over the next few months. During Christmas in 2008, Emmett proposed to Ashley, and to his delight, she accepted. The couple tied the knot in a Mormon temple, surrounded by their shared values and beliefs. The ceremony was a beautiful expression of their commitment to each other and their faith. As newlyweds, Emmett and Ashley were filled with joy and excitement as they began their new life together. Their marriage was built on a foundation of stability and happiness, which is deeply rooted in Mormon values. In the Mormon faith, marriage is considered a sacred and eternal bond that transcends mortal life. While divorce is not entirely ruled out, it is strongly discouraged and only permitted under specific, extreme circumstances. In 2005, Ashley and Emmett had twin daughters, and they were thrilled to start their journey as parents. Emmett loved being a father and cherished every moment with his girls. Ashley was happy to be living the life she always wanted. At the time, they were college students at Utah State University, and they managed to balance school with taking care of their babies. Although they faced challenges, their faith and love for each other helped them overcome difficulties. With determination, they pushed through and worked towards a better future. In 2009, Emmett graduated from Utah State University with high honors, went to law school, and passed the bar exam, becoming a bankruptcy attorney. During this time, Ashley stayed at home to care for their growing family, while Emmett focused on building his career. Ashley Kohnle took on the role of managing the household and raising their 4 young children. To outsiders, the Kohnle family appeared to have a perfect life, a beautiful home, multiple kids, and a fulfilling career for Emmett. But beneath the surface, things were different. In August 2010, Emmett began to feel overwhelmed by the financial burden of providing for his family of 6. To remedy this, Emmett decided to start his own business, a criminal defense firm. Through a friend, he met Candy Hall, a reputable paralegal with experience in criminal law. The two met for lunch and got along well, leading Emmett to hire her for his firm. Candy was married to Robert Hall, a hard worker and devoted father. When Candy landed the job at Emmett's firm, she was initially thrilled, and her husband and children were happy for her. As the stress of building a business and raising their large family took its toll, Ashley noticed a change in her marriage to Emmett. He was overwhelmed by his responsibilities and saw a release by spending excessive time at the gym, often at inconvenient times that left Ashley to care for their 4 children alone. Despite their growing distance, Ashley and Emmett welcomed their 5th child, a son, on January 15, 2011. However, Emmett's behavior was different from when their other children were born. He began spending more and more time away from home, sometimes staying out overnight. Ashley confided in her sister, expressing her genuine concern that Emmett's activities might be evidence of infidelity. Emmett's assistant, Candy Hall, was facing marital problems similar to Ashley's. Candy confided in a friend that her husband Rob was jealous of her working for the charming Emmett. The constant arguing was putting a strain on their relationship. On March 6, 2011, Ashley and Emmett celebrated their 7th wedding anniversary, but Emmett didn't join her. Instead, he claimed to be at a bodybuilding competition, leaving Ashley to take care of their children by herself. Ashley felt anxious about her marriage, wondering if she was to blame for Emmett's unhappiness. Since divorce wasn't an option, she decided to work on improving their relationship. With a fresh resolve on March 11th, Ashley aimed to restore unity to her home. Ashley was determined to repair her strained relationship with her husband Emmett. She spent the entire day planning a perfect evening, attending to every detail to make it special. She cooked his favorite meal, tidied the house, and reminded the children to be on their best behavior. Ashley set the table and waited for Emmett to arrive home from work at 6 p.m. However, he walked in 2 hours late. When she tried to greet him with a kiss, he turned away, leaving her feeling cold. Despite his aloofness and the growing distance between them, Ashley was resolute in her mission to rekindle Emmett's love for her. She firmly believed that their love was worth fighting for and was willing to do whatever it took to salvage their relationship. 2 hours after she had finished preparing dinner, the family finally gathered around the table to eat. But to Ashley's dismay, Emmett claimed he wasn't hungry. Ashley prepared a meal for her husband Emmett, but he showed little interest, leaving her disappointed and hurt. When he claimed he needed to go to Walgreens, Ashley sensed something was wrong and asked him to stay and talk. Emmett responded harshly and left, leaving Ashley confused and hurt. Meanwhile, Emmett's assistant, Candy, was going through a tough time in her marriage to Rob Hall. That same day, Rob decided to pack his bags and leave their home, marking the end of their relationship. Rob had a strong bond with his loved ones, but he needed space. One evening, Rob asked his daughter if she'd borrowed his ex-wife Candy's car. She said no. Later, she drove past Walgreens, saw Candy's car, and called her dad to let him know. Rob's casual response had a profound impact on 2 families. Ashley lay awake in bed, her heart filled with worry as she prayed for her marriage to succeed. Despite her efforts to reach him, Emmett wasn't responding to her texts and calls, causing her great unease. Her instincts told her something was wrong, and she felt a sense of dread. Meanwhile, at around 1 p.m., A 911 call reported gunshots and a screaming woman in the Walgreens parking lot. The police responded quickly, unsure of what they would find. They didn't know if it was a random shooting, a botched drug deal, a robbery, or something else. As the first officer approached the scene, he was met with a disturbing sight. A lifeless body on the ground, and another person, wounded and clutching their head in pain. The injured person was rushed to the hospital with a gunshot wound, leaving the police with many unanswered questions. Amidst the chaos, the police were wanted to speak with one woman in particular, Candy Hall, who was present at the crime scene. Candy identified the man in the hospital as her husband Rob, and the deceased man as her boss Emmett. Emmett had suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head and chest. Shortly after Emmett's body was discovered in the Walgreens parking lot, his wife Ashley received a knock on her door. When she answered, police officers broke the devastating news to her. Her husband Emmett was dead, a victim of a shooting. Ashley was shocked and distraught, unable to fathom what had led to this tragic event. The police then asked Ashley if she was familiar with Rob and Candy Hall. Ashley revealed that she knew Candy as Emmett's assistant, but she had long suspected that the two were having an affair. The police brought Candy in for questioning at the station, determined to piece together the events leading up to Emmett's murder and Rob's shooting. During the interrogation, Candy denied having a romantic relationship with her boss Emmett, and she vehemently rejected any suggestion of intimate relations. According to Candy, she had driven to Walgreens that night solely to pick up a prescription. Candy and Emmett met by chance in a store and decided to take a drive in Emmett's car. During the drive, Candy's phone rang. It was her estranged husband Rob. Candy told Rob she was with Emmett, which sparked Rob's jealousy and led to him making a violent threat against Emmett. After the phone call, Candy and Emmett stopped at a gas station and eventually arrived at Walgreens. When they got out of the car, Candy saw Rob waiting for them, visibly angry. The situation escalated into a heated argument and physical fight between Rob and Emmett. Amidst the chaos, Candy heard 3 loud gunshots and turned to see both men on the ground. She saw a gun lying nearby, picked it up and threw it away. When questioned by detectives, Candy claimed she didn't know who fired the first shots. Rob, who suffered a superficial gunshot wound to the head, was treated at the hospital and then interviewed by detectives. He told them that the gun found at the scene was his, and that it fell out of his pocket during the fight with Emmett at Walgreens. According to Rob, Emmett dove for the gun, and they struggled over it, resulting in Emmett shooting him in the head. Rob claimed he didn't know who shot Emmett during the struggle. The detectives weren't surprised that Rob didn't remember much due to his head wound from the gunshot. However, they did wonder if Emmett had fired the first shot, considering he ended up dead. To get to the bottom of the incident, which occurred in the Walgreens parking lot, the detectives checked the security footage. Upon reviewing the footage, they saw Rob Hall arrive at the parking lot at 9:55 p.m. 1 minute later, he entered the Walgreens store, rushing through each aisle as if searching for someone. The footage then showed Rob leaving the store at 10:06 p.m. and parking his car beside the candy section, where he waited for several minutes. 10 minutes after the shooting, Emmett's truck appeared on security footage as it pulled into the parking lot, but the shooting itself wasn't caught on camera. Although Candy, Emmett's assistant, initially denied having a romantic relationship with her boss, co-workers whispered that they were more than just colleagues. In fact, co-workers often saw Candy and Rob spending time together in Rob's office, with the door closed. Just 3 weeks after she started her job, detectives made a surprising discovery. Emmett had accompanied Candy to the public defender's office to discuss divorcing Rob. During their investigation, crime scene investigators searched Emmett's vehicle and found steroids in the glove compartment. This didn't surprise many of Emmett's loved ones, as he was obsessed with bodybuilding and had been acting strangely, leading them to suspect he was using steroids. When Candy gave her statement to the detectives, She described a distinctive pattern of gunshots that suggested Rob had shot and killed Emmett twice before turning the gun on himself. This evidence was enough for the detectives to obtain an arrest warrant for Rob Hall, charging him with first-degree murder. Rob was arrested and charged with Emmett's murder. The consequences of Rob's actions were severe. If convicted, he faced life in prison without parole or the death penalty. As the trial approached, Ashley, Emmett's wife, hoped it would bring her some closure. She believed that understanding her husband's infidelity and death would help her heal. Prosecutors argued that Rob was angry at Emmett for having an affair with Candy and blamed Emmett for ruining his marriage. According to the prosecution, Rob shot Emmett and then killed himself. However, Rob's defense team told a different story. They claimed Emmett was the aggressor on the night he died, and that he had a history of steroid abuse. They alleged that during the altercation, Emmett grabbed Rob's gun and shot Rob before Rob regained possession and killed Emmett in self-defense. One of the key witnesses in Rob's trial was his wife, Candy. Her testimony differed slightly from her initial statement to the police. Instead of hearing 2 rapid gunshots followed by another, she claimed to have heard a pop, followed by 2 more rapid pops. This new version of events supported the defense's argument that Emmett shot Rob first. To prove Rob was the shooter, prosecutors presented forensic evidence that the type of weapon used in the parking lot shooting left significant gunshot residue, GSR, after firing. Investigators tested Rob and Emmett for GSR and found that Rob's left palm had 32 particles, his right palm had 23, while Emmett had only 1 particle on his left hand and none on his right. The forensic evidence proved that Rob was the one who fired the gun 3 times, and Emmett never possessed the weapon. After careful consideration, the jury found Rob Hall not guilty of first-degree murder, but guilty of second-degree murder, which means the murder was not premeditated. The judge sentenced Rob to 30 years in prison. Rob will be eligible for parole in 2028 when he is 58 years old. Despite the conviction, Rob maintains his innocence and appealed his conviction in 2021, but the Idaho Supreme Court denied him a retrial. 2 months after Emmett's murder, Candy Hall was arrested and charged with embezzlement for allegedly stealing money from her previous employer. This charge was unrelated to Emmett's murder. Candy pleaded guilty and was sentenced to imprisonment, released on parole in 2014, and remains on probation until 2026. In an interview, Candy expressed deep feelings of guilt over the incident, mainly due to its impact on her relationships with her children. She hopes to prove to them that it was a regrettable mistake. Ashley struggled to come to terms with her husband's murder by his lover's husband. In a 2015 interview, she faced Candy Hall for the first time. Despite her emotional pain, Ashley decided to move on and create a new life. She moved out of town with their 5 children, who gradually adjusted to the change and found joy again. Ashley eventually remarried, had 2 more children, and now blogs for victims of trauma. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The incredible case of Michelle Whitaker. Michelle Laurel Whitaker was born on August 16, 1969, as the 4th of 5 children to her parents. According to her mom, Laura Andrews, Michelle was extremely close to her entire family. However, this changed when they moved from Illinois to Gastonia, North Carolina. And Michelle's once happy demeanor began to fade. As she entered her teenage years, Michelle and her mom began to clash frequently, primarily due to her mom's strictness. After graduating from high school, Michelle got married, but the union lasted less than a year. Her inexperience and youth made it difficult for her to handle the problems her partner created. The abusive treatment by her husband marked the beginning of a prolonged and distressing period in Michelle's life. Those close to her believe this tumultuous period led to her later struggles. At the time, she struggled to cope and made poor choices as a result. After her divorce, Michelle's family moved to Spartanburg, South Carolina. By the time she was 30, Michelle was struggling with alcohol addiction and had already had 3 failed marriages. She was working part-time as a waitress and was barely getting by. One evening in 1999, Michelle met a man named David after her shift ended, and he offered to give her a ride home. Michelle accepted, but soon regretted her decision. Instead of taking her home, David took her to a secluded area where he assaulted her and forced her into intimate contact. He was arrested a year later, pleaded guilty to assault and battery, and received an 8-year prison sentence. Just before she disappeared, Michelle was arrested for driving under the influence of alcohol. Michelle's parents decided it was time to take drastic measures. They contacted the police and asked them to hold Michelle in custody until a spot in a rehabilitation center became available. Although it was a difficult decision, her parents felt it was the only way to help Michelle in her situation. However, Michelle became extremely upset by this, and from that point on, her relationship with her mother significantly deteriorated. Unfortunately, Michelle was mistakenly released from jail without receiving the court-ordered treatment for her substance and alcohol abuse. On August 5, 2002, Michelle had an argument with her mother and stormed out of the house in a bad mood. 3 days later, the man she was staying with contacted her mother, Laura Andrews, to inform her that he couldn't find Michelle after they had had an argument. This is how Laura learned of her daughter's disappearance. Laura immediately sought help from a friend who worked at the local police station. But the police, familiar with Michelle's lifestyle, advised her to wait a little longer, assuring her that Michelle would likely show up on her own. However, 2 weeks passed and Michelle failed to return home. On August 21, 2002, Laura filed an official missing persons report, and local law enforcement began investigating Michelle Whitaker's disappearance. During their investigation, they discovered the last place Michelle was spotted, a truck stop. This information came from a local resident named Doug, who had met Michelle by chance on the street the day before she disappeared. Doug recounted that he had stopped his motorcycle outside a bar where Michelle was sitting and struck up a conversation with her. Michelle told him that she had had a fight with her boyfriend and he had thrown her out of the house. Later that evening, they visited 2 bars together, playing a few games of billiards at one of them. They then took a ride on Doug's motorcycle until dawn, after which they went to his house. Thus, it was revealed that Michelle Whitaker had spent her last evening visiting local bars, and Doug was the last person to have seen her alive. This made Doug the prime suspect in Michelle's disappearance. According to his testimony, Michelle had planned to go to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, a resort city on the Atlantic coast, where she hoped to earn good money working in local bars and restaurants. Doug claimed that he dropped Michelle off at a truck stop, but only after giving her some clothes, including a t-shirt and shorts, and some money to buy coffee and newspapers. He said he wished her good luck before leaving. To verify Doug's story, the police gave him a lie detector test, which he passed. They also tested the man Michelle had been staying with before she vanished, but found no evidence to suggest he was involved in her disappearance. The police began to consider the possibility that Michelle had actually gone to Myrtle Beach, which is approximately 250 miles from Spartanburg. A few more weeks went by, but there was still no sign of Michelle. Her family and friends were growing increasingly anxious. Despite her anger and resentment towards her parents, they couldn't bring themselves to believe she would abandon her family and go into hiding. Michelle's prolonged disappearance made the local sheriff question her motives. When people travel for extended periods, they typically take some personal belongings with them, but Michelle had left with almost nothing. Moreover, she had a beloved pet dog to which she was deeply attached. Every detective interviewed agreed that Michelle would never willingly abandon her dog. In the meantime, Michelle's parents began driving around the neighborhood, hoping to find any clue that might lead them to their daughter. After receiving multiple tips that Michelle had been spotted on a beach in North Carolina, they headed there immediately. They spent 3 days searching for her, posting flyers and talking to locals, but their efforts ultimately proved fruitless. After 6 months of unsuccessful searches, Laura Andrews started questioning whether her behavior towards her daughter had been right. She had witnessed her daughter's downward spiral and couldn't just stand by. Laura wanted to protect her in any way possible. Additionally, she suspected that the 1999 brutal attack Michelle suffered might have contributed to her disappearance. Laura couldn't forgive herself for the hurtful words she spoke to Michelle after the attack, despite the assault being a terrible act by a stranger. Laura initially blamed Michelle for taking a destructive path and causing harm to herself, which only damaged Michelle's self-esteem further with her words. From the sheriff's office, it was assumed Michelle had motives to escape due to her reputation. Detectives thought she'd eventually be arrested, but a year passed with no results. The police were alarmed that Michelle left no digital traces, which wasn't a good sign. Both police and family wondered if Michelle was a crime victim, possibly falling prey to a truck driver, but this theory remained unsubstantiated. 2 more years passed with no leads. On the 3rd anniversary of Michelle's disappearance, after police and Laura Andrews visited the truck stop where Michelle was last seen, local TV stations revisited the story. Just days after Michelle's story aired on TV news, the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Office received a strange letter. The anonymous letter, handwritten on a small sheet of paper, claimed to reveal the location of Michelle Whitaker's body. A crude, homemade map accompanied the letter, pinpointing the exact spot. Despite its amateurish appearance, the letter was well written and proper, lending it an air of credibility. The sheriff, accompanied by search dogs, embarked on a search of a rural area 25 miles from where Michelle was last seen. This development came 3 years after her disappearance, and her family was torn between despair and hope. Some had reluctantly accepted that Michelle might be dead, while others clung to the possibility that she was alive and safe. The search dogs were unable to detect any scent, and the operation was eventually called off. Although relieved that no body was found, the investigators remained perplexed by the letter. A handwriting analysis and DNA evidence from the envelope suggested that the author was a woman, but her identity remained unknown. In 2006, Michelle's parents relocated to Rock Hill, South Carolina, which is 65 miles from Spartanburg. A year later, on the 5th anniversary of Michelle's disappearance, the whole family gathered at the church. Michelle's mother, Laura Andrews, did not want to treat the gathering as a memorial service because Michelle's body had not been found, and there was still a faint hope that she might be alive. Another year passed, and Detective William Gary took over the investigation of Michelle's disappearance. At the time, he was handling a dozen unsolved cases, including Michelle's. Since many years had gone by without any evidence that Michelle was still alive, her case was considered a felony. The lack of evidence led the investigators to believe that something tragic had likely occurred. As the 6th anniversary of Michelle's disappearance approached, on August 4, 2008, Detective Gary received a call from a woman claiming to know Michelle's whereabouts. She said Michelle was living in Oregon. The woman had seen Michelle's file on an episode of Forensic Files and a website created by Laura, which helped her recognize Michelle as a woman who had been living with friends for 6 years, unaware that her family had been searching for her. After receiving the mysterious message, the investigators were understandably cautious. Detective William Gary, for evidence, requested that the woman send a photo of Michelle. He then showed the picture to Detective Wood, who had previously worked on the case and immediately recognized her. Promptly, an Oregon State police officer was dispatched to the address in question to confirm Michelle's identity. In a remarkable coincidence, on August 5, 2008, exactly 6 years after Michelle's argument with her mother and her departure from home, Detective Laura Andrews received a call informing her that her daughter had been found alive. Laura struggled to process the news, and only after hanging up the phone did a flood of questions arise. Where is she? How is she? And what had she been doing all this time? Although the news was welcome, a family reunion was not possible at this point. The police were bound to respect Michelle's privacy and could not disclose her whereabouts to her parents. It was up to Michelle to initiate contact with her family. The detectives tried to persuade Michelle to talk to her relatives, if only to alleviate their concerns. The next evening, Michelle phoned her mother. 2 weeks later, at Atlanta Airport, Michelle and her family had a long overdue reunion. She confessed that she was exhausted from her former way of life. After her argument with her mom, Michelle came to a realization. She believed her family would be better off without her around. Initially, when Doug dropped her off at the truck stop, Michelle had planned to head to Myrtle Beach to find work. But instead, she hitchhiked and ended up in Las Vegas, then California, and eventually Oregon. Michelle offered apologies to both her family and the police, who had invested considerable time and resources into searching for her over the past 6 years. She had been living under her real name, and it never occurred to her that anyone was still looking for her. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Wilma Anderson. On November 14, 2019, a 17-year-old girl named Wilma Anderson disappeared after visiting her ex-boyfriend, Tishko Ahmed, in Uddevalla, Sweden. Wilma had gone to retrieve her belongings after their breakup, but this would be the last time she was seen alive. As the investigation progressed, the detectives' findings shocked everyone. This is the haunting case of Wilma Anderson. Wilma Anderson was born to Linda and Marcus Anderson. However, due to family struggles and their divorce, Wilma was unable to live with either parent. Despite this, her mother remained deeply involved in her life, while Wilma stayed with her sister, Emily, whom their mother described as a vibrant and future-minded girl. Wilma was a sociable person, surrounded by an active social circle that filled her days. She adored social media, frequently sharing snapshots of her life on Facebook, and relished every opportunity to be captured in photographs, showcasing her innate creativity and unwavering spirit. At the age of 15, Wilma met a 20-year-old man named Tishko Ahmed Shabazz in Sweden. Despite the 5-year age difference, there were no legal obstacles to their relationship, as the age of consent in Sweden is 15. Wilma's mother had reservations about her daughter dating an older individual, but reluctantly accepted her choice, trusting her daughter's judgment. Tishko, originally from Iraq, had relocated to Sweden at the age of 8, residing with his father and stepmother. Accounts from Tishko's friend depicted a school life marked by bullying, but as he matured, he developed an unwavering resolve, refusing to back down from any challenge he faced. He gained his Swedish citizenship in 2014 and eventually found employment in the care sector after completing his education in 2018. Wilma and Tishko took a significant step, moving in together in Uddevalla, Sweden. Initially, their relationship was smooth, but it eventually shifted, taking a darker and more troubling turn. Tishko's demeanor grew increasingly controlling, a change that did not escape Wilma's mother, who had noticed her daughter's altered behavior over the 2 years spent with her boyfriend. Wilma frequently confided in her sister Emily about the turbulent relationship with Tishko. On November 14, 2019, while on the phone with Emily, Wilma revealed her intention to end the relationship during her visit to Tishko's apartment to collect her belongings. She expressed her exhaustion with Tishko's incessant control over her life, dictating what she wore, where she went, who she talked to, and even her makeup. Feeling suffocated by his domineering and abusive behavior, she had had enough and simply wanted it to end. Upon Tishko's return from work, Wilma ended the call, saying she had to go, possibly wanting to conclude what had brought her to Tishko's apartment. Sadly, This would be the last time her sister or any of her loved ones would hear from her. Later, Emily desperately tried to contact her sister, but the calls went unanswered. The following day, November 15th, Wilma had a dentist appointment, but she didn't show up. On November 17th, Wilma's worried parents went to the apartment she shared with her boyfriend. After knocking for what felt like a long time, the door finally opened, revealing Tishko. Linda, deeply concerned, questioned Tishko about Wilma's whereabouts, noticing his distant demeanor. She suspected he might have been under the influence, but she and her husband persisted, determined to get answers. Tishko admitted that their relationship had ended, claiming Wilma had left after collecting her belongings, and that he had no idea where she was currently, adding that he didn't expect to reconnect with her anytime soon. They entered the apartment, hoping to further investigate the situation by having a brief conversation. Tishko recounted the evening's events to Wilma's parents, a heated argument that had occurred upon his return from work around 5:30 p.m., which led to Wilma leaving their relationship. Initially, Tishko and Wilma had an unpredictable and on and off relationship, primarily due to Tishko's behavior towards Wilma. Her parents were not overly alarmed at first, as this was not an unusual occurrence. Meanwhile, Emily, Wilma's sister, was deeply concerned and turned to Facebook, urgently seeking information about her missing sister. Emily's posts detailed Wilma's disappearance since November 14th, emphasizing the lack of communication, which was a stark deviation from Wilma's habitual contact with her family. Emily described Wilma's physical appearance, highlighting her height of 165 centimeters, her dark hair with blonde highlights, and expressed the distress at her sudden disappearance, a departure from her usual behavior. The police promptly filed a report and started collecting statements from family and friends, determined to trace Wilma's last known interactions. They investigated who had recently spoken to or seen the missing girl. Linda and Emily confirmed they had not had any contact with Wilma since November 14th, and their calls had remained unanswered. Joining forces, a search party was assembled, blending police efforts with the support of friends and family, and utilizing police dogs and drone technology to search inaccessible areas for any trace of Wilma. When authorities approached Tishko, he claimed and asserted that he had no knowledge of Wilma's whereabouts, and neither had he received any recent communication from her. By Sunday, November 17th, 3 days into the search, the concerning silence from Wilma still persisted. Wilma, who was typically active on social media, had now gone silent for an alarming period. The urgency increased as around 5,000 people came together fervently, joining the search in a collective effort to find her. The police persistently returned to Tishko, seeking information, but he steadfastly maintained his ignorance about Wilma's whereabouts. His claims suggested that after their breakup, she had moved on to another man. However, this supposed narrative lacked any substantiated evidence, leaving her friends and family baffled and in the dark. Concurrently, Wilma's family revealed a distressing narrative to the authorities. They lamented how their daughter's life had taken a drastic downturn since her involvement with Tishko Ahmed, painting a stark contrast to her once vibrant and sociable self. Linda unveiled the pervasive control Tishko had exerted over her, dictating her every move and scrutinizing her whereabouts. Emily disclosed Wilma's unsettling revelations, where she admitted to Tish's violent behavior in the final stages of their relationship. Despite the turmoil, Wilma still harbored a deep affection for Tishko. Tishko had gone to great lengths by installing a GPS device on Wilma's phone, allowing him constant monitoring of her location at all times. A series of text messages between Wilma and Tishko revealed the disturbing reality of Tishko's controlling behavior. In one exchange from a previous argument, Wilma had pleaded, "Contact me when you think you can trust me," to which Tishko had responded, "Contact me when you know your place." The police, intent on uncovering the truth, delved into Tishko's final movements. Tishko adamantly claimed he hadn't left the apartment after arriving home from work at 5 p.m. Authorities wanted to make sure he was telling the truth, and therefore retraced Tish's movements by tracking his phone's GPS. CCTV footage had captured Tishko at a supermarket around 2:30 p.m. on the day Wilma disappeared. He then returned home from work by 5 p.m. Neighbors recounted a heated, escalating argument between the couple at around 6 p.m., an occurrence not uncommon, but this one was louder than the usual ones. Concerned, one neighbor ventured to check on them, only to encounter an eerie silence just as they neared to knock on the apartment door. No one was arguing anymore. It was dead silent. This strange silence prompted unease, but the neighbor, confused about what to do next, just retreated to their apartment. The police meticulously pieced together Tishko's movements, extending their investigation to his workplace and the company vehicle he used, requesting forensic testing on it. The GPS in the car revealed his movements from Thursday the 14th to Monday the 18th, indicating visits to clients interspersed with returns to his own residence throughout his usual work hours during those days. On the day of the heated argument, Tishko's phone revealed that he left his apartment around 6:30 p.m. as dusk settled. Witnesses spotted him striding along the freeway, a solitary figure shrouded in all-black attire. A passing motorcyclist described him as visibly distant, lost in his thoughts. Law enforcement intercepted Tishko and escorted him. Upon questioning, Tishko explained that his intention was to catch a train, but he changed his mind and decided to take a contemplative walk home instead. However, an official report was never filed, leaving a gap in the recorded events on November 19, 2019. The unfolding events led to Tishko's arrest. He had visible scratches on his forearms, and a search of his apartment uncovered unsettling clues. Wilma's belongings, including her bag and coat, were hanging in their usual places. Further discoveries awaited investigators that Tuesday night, as her shoes and eyeglasses were also found. Linda emphasized her daughter's attachment to her bag. The examination revealed a trail of bloodstains splattered across the walls and floors of every room, suggesting a violent struggle throughout the apartment. As the investigators pieced together the evidence, a sinister narrative emerged. Traces of blood trailed from the living room to the bedroom, painting a haunting picture of something being dragged. The bed bore a grim imprint, a haunting shape of a torso, highlighted by the revealing glow of blue star. The discovery of muscle tissue on a knife and splattered across the living room wall only added to the gruesome mosaic of the crime scene. The sheer amount of blood found suggested a scene of extreme violence, making survival unlikely. Outside the apartment, the search continued, uncovering trash bags containing Tishko's bedding, stained with clear signs of blood. Confronted at the police station, Tishko was presented with the incriminating evidence, which he promptly denied any knowledge of, firmly asserting that he would be aware of any substantial bloodshed in his own residence. Meanwhile, the quest to find Wilma intensified, with an ever-growing throng of individuals rallying daily, determined to aid in her search, fueling hope amidst the encroaching darkness of the unfolding tragedy. The apartment where Wilma was last seen turned into a stark crime scene, yet all attempts to establish contact with her remained fruitless. Then, on November 28th, 2 weeks since Wilma vanished without a trace, cadaver dogs were enlisted for assistance at the crime scene. These trained canines, specialized in detecting scents associated with deceased individuals, ventured into the bedroom and swiftly signaled a chilling indication. A deceased person or human remains had likely been in that very area. Moreover, a distinct odor permeated the apartment, heightening the grim atmosphere. Despite prior searches, the police meticulously re-examined the bedroom, drawn to the area marked by the dogs. Their focus honed in on a wardrobe, seemingly just another piece of furniture in the room. Yet within that innocuous wardrobe lay a small travel case, seemingly inconspicuous among the room's contents. Although previously overlooked, the officers, driven by instinct, seized the case, poised to uncover its secrets. Inside, investigators discovered a large object concealed within aluminum kitchen foil, A harrowing revelation met with bloodstains in the case's interior. As they cautiously unraveled the foil's contents, a heart-wrenching and shocking reality awaited them. Wilma's decapitated head lay shrouded within. The head had been wrapped meticulously and bound with tape, and the travel case had become a repository of the horrifying events that had happened to Wilma. The case was dispatched to Gothenburg's forensic labs for further testing, where detailed examination revealed Tishko's fingerprints, an ominous connection tying him to the heinous act. Additionally, at the crime scene where the thrown-away garbage bags were found, a footstep marked with Wilma's blood showed Tishko's clear footprint. The sad discoveries revealed the savageness of the crime. Medical examiners, although not able to definitively determine the reason for Wilma's death, pointed out serious head and eye wounds caused by a harsh blow. The horrific act of cutting off her head resulted in additional injuries to her head. Wilma's heartbroken family learned the heartbreaking truth about their daughter's destiny. Linda, driven by strong determination, joined the search operations, no longer looking for their missing loved one, but sadly hunting for the rest of Wilma's remains. The family, thrown into the worst of nightmares, faced the shocking details emerging from the proof found in the walls of the apartment. A dreadful truth came to light. Wilma's final moments probably took place in the living room where she was subjected to a violent attack. Her world was shattered by a devastating head strike, leaving behind a haunting trace of violence. The Swedish authorities filed a report that detailed Tishko's denial of Andersson's murder, vehemently asserting his innocence. His unsettling statement echoed, insisting on a warped sense of affection, which he claimed, "You forget that this is a girl that I have loved, and that I have lived my life perfectly. If I had murdered my girl, I would not have saved her head." Law enforcement had secured ample evidence to press charges against Tishko, and his trial was set for May 2020. However, Wilma's body remained undiscovered throughout the entire court proceedings. Shabazz, devoid of any display of remorse or emotion, stood stoic amidst the relentless investigation. Reports surfaced, painting a disturbing picture of his beliefs. Allegations that he viewed his ex-girlfriend as a figure of malevolence, associating her with Satan and espousing outlandish claims of her collaboration with Democrats against the then US President, Donald Trump. His bizarre hero worship of the president even led to a failed attempt to join Trump's campaign, halted due to inadequate entry documents. Attempts to plead not guilty by reason of insanity during the trial, by citing these absurd beliefs and claims of Wilma as proof of insanity by his defense, fell short. On July 27, 2020, the verdict sealed Tishko's fate. The court pronounced 23-year-old Tishko Shabazz Ahmed guilty of 17-year-old Wilma Andersson's murder, handing down a life sentence, which was later reduced to 18 years by the Court of Appeal. The baffling reduction of the sentence stemmed from the absence of concrete evidence pinpointing the exact cause of Wilma's demise, or the sequence of events due to the absence of her body, a haunting absence that left critical questions unanswered, hindering the pursuit of justice. In late 2020, Wilma's funeral brought a solemn closure to this tragic saga, a heart-wrenching conclusion that undoubtedly plunged Wilma's family into unfathomable sorrow. Our deepest sympathies go out to the life lost too soon and the grieving loved ones she left behind. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. In 1980, the small town of Ambato in Ecuador, South America, was eagerly looking forward to celebrating the popular festival of fruits and flowers. This festival, which began in the mid-20th century, was created to help the local community cope with the devastating aftermath of a powerful earthquake that struck the region on August 5, 1949. The earthquake claimed the lives of 5,000 people and left the town in ruins. The Festival of Fruits and Flowers became a beacon of hope for the people of Ambato, providing them with a sense of unity and a way to heal from the tragedy. However, before the earthquake, there was an event that raised concerns. At the time, countless little girls between the ages of 8 and 12 were disappearing without a trace. Parents were crying out for answers as they desperately searched for hope. One girl was sent to sell some items in order to purchase a bus ticket home. She was never seen again. It was feared that she may have been sold into sex slavery. She was one of the many little girls that went missing in 1980. And even though the number of missing children was growing, the police wrote them off as runaways and did little to help find the lost children of Ambato. Law enforcement issued a statement suggesting that one of the missing girls may have run away due to poor academic performance. This appears to be a half-hearted effort to evade responsibility and avoid taking action to locate the missing children. Such a response is not only irresponsible, but also disgraceful. Regardless of the cops' incompetence, the families did everything they could to find their daughters, who were clearly in some kind of trouble. Then suddenly, like being sucked into a nightmare, bodies started washing up. The bodies were some of the missing girls. They had been raped and strangled, and some of them had been choked to death so viciously that their eyes had come out of their sockets. But the nightmare wasn't over, and more innocent girls went missing. The families wanted answers, but with no tips, no evidence, no persons of interest, and no leads, the police could offer no explanation to the families of Ambato, who knew damn well that there was a boogeyman in the town preying on their little girls. But this was no longer a sole concern for the town of Ambato. Citizens across Ecuador started to panic because, after all, the monster could be anywhere. Ivanova Yakume was the 9-year-old daughter of a respected baker. She disappeared while fetching some food for her father on February 15, 1980. Her family believed she'd been taken for ransom, and because her father was well known in the community, the cops took his cries for help more seriously. He and his wife hung posters offering around $20,000 for any news about his daughter's whereabouts. It was around this time that a national newspaper began to cover the story of the missing girls. Then, on March 8th, the little girl's body was found in a cabin on a farm. She reportedly died lying naked on an old, dirty mattress. She too had been raped and strangled. The following day, March 9th, 1980, an unfamiliar man spent most of the day in the Ambato Plaza, peddling various small items such as chains and locks. At around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he made his way to a food stand operated by Carlina Ramon. While the stranger appeared to be assessing the menu, Carlina observed that his focus abruptly shifted to something else, her 11-year-old daughter, Alicia. The man seemed hell-bent on getting the young girl's attention. When her mother wasn't looking, he repeatedly gestured for her to come over to him, but Alicia was cautious. She told her mother what the man was doing. This must have spooked the stranger, who began to hurry out of the plaza. But Carlina Ramon was suspicious. She was aware of the missing girls, and she believed in her gut feeling about the situation. With the help of the other plaza vendors, she went after the stranger, and just after he exited the plaza, Carlina and her group caught him. They overpowered him before dragging him back inside. Carlina wasted no time and immediately accused him of kidnapping and murdering the dead children. But the man pleaded, explaining that he was nothing more than a humble worker with a pure heart. They called the authorities and held him there until the police arrived. When the cops brought the suspicious man in for questioning, they were shocked to learn his true identity. He wasn't even a native of Ecuador. He was from Colombia, and he'd been missing since 1957, when he was just 8 years old. His mother assumed he'd been kidnapped. That man is Pedro Alonso Lopez. He was born into poverty on October 8, 1948, in Ipiales, Nariño, Colombia. When he was 5, he moved with his mother to El Espino. His mother was a prostitute with 13 children. Pedro was her 7th. Pedro's father, Medado Reyes, was part of Colombia's right-wing party and was killed in La Violencia, a 10-year-long civil war in Colombia that lasted from 1948 to 1958. It was a battle between the Colombian Conservative Party and the Colombian Liberal Party. It started with the assassination of a liberal presidential candidate, and well, it left the poor country riddled with crime, chaos, and bloodshed. The war is estimated to have cost Colombia around 200,000 lives. It was a horrible time and place for anyone to be born into, but it was the hand Pedro Lopez was dealt. It's believed that Pedro's dad, Medado, had cheated on his wife with Pedro's mom, Benilda Lopez de Castaneda. Pedro never met his father. His mother, Benilda, was 3 months pregnant with him when his father was killed. Benilda claimed that Pedro was a polite young boy who had aspiring dreams to be a teacher, and was even known to help his brothers and sisters with their Basalfrays. In a school for orphans, at 12 years old, a teacher sexually assaulted Pedro. In response, Pedro stole money from the office and ran away. A few years later, at the age of 18 or 21, Pedro was caught and arrested for stealing a car. On day 2 of his imprisonment, he was gang-raped by 4 older prisoners. This was likely his breaking point, the moment when Pedro truly snapped and the monster was fully born. Instead of reporting the assault to the prison authorities, Pedro took matters into his own hands. He crafted a makeshift knife and over a 2-week period, ended the lives of 3 of his 4 attackers. A following investigation labeled the triple murder as self-defense, and reports state that Lopez only had 2 years added to his sentence as punishment for the crimes. After that, no one messed with Pedro again. However, when Pedro was finally released from prison, he began stalking young girls as if it were his full-time career. By 1978, in the country of Peru alone, he had an estimated 100 victims, all little girls, all dead at his hands. At the time, he primarily preyed upon the children of local tribes. Eventually, Pedro was captured. They caught him trying to kidnap a 9-year-old girl. Pedro was stripped, tortured for hours by the tribe, and then buried up to his neck in sand. They poured syrup on him and planned to let the fierce Peruvian ants slowly feast on the evil child murderer's flesh. Luckily, an American missionary was driving by in her Jeep when she saw what was going on and stepped in to help. She pleaded with the tribe to spare Pedro's life and proposed handing him over to the authorities instead, as that was the proper course of action. The tribespeople consented and placed Pedro, still bound, in the back of the missionary's vehicle. Some reports state that the woman did indeed turn Pedro over to the police, but not wanting to waste time investigating native tribal complaints, they simply deported Pedro back to Ecuador. However, in Pedro's own words, this is not what happened. He said she never approached the police and instead let him go free at the border of Colombia, a foolish mistake that would lead to more victims across South America. When talking about the missionary that saved him, Pedro stated that the only reason he didn't kill her in the end was because she was too old for him to be attracted to her. And so, the monster of the Andes continued his reign of terror. Lopez's stalking was consistent while he traveled through Colombia and Ecuador. During this time, a huge quantity of missing young girls were being attributed to slavery and trafficking ring abductions. There were no suspects, no evidence, and no trace of the missing girls until a flash flood hit the town of Ambato, Ecuador, in 1980. Nature had uncovered the remains of 4 little girls who had gone missing. They had been raped, tortured, and strangled. 3 days later, the police arrested Pedro Lopez at the local plaza after a struggle. With his capture, it appeared that the people of Ecuador could once again feel safe in their beds at night. Despite being subjected to physical abuse and intimidation while in police custody, Pedro continued to profess his innocence. The authorities remained convinced of his guilt, even though their heavy-handed interrogation tactics failed to elicit a confession. They planned it, sending undercover cop Captain Gonzalez to be Pedro's cellmate. For 27 days, Gonzalez hardly slept, keeping a towel round his neck at night, scared Lopez would strangle him. But he kept his cool, pretending to be a rapist too, and soon Pedro started confessing. He bragged about his murders in Ecuador, Peru, and Colombia, boasting with glee about his evil antics. As Pedro spilled the beans about everything, Captain Gonzalez said the information he received was beyond his worst nightmare. Then, on the 31st of July in 1981, 33-year-old Pedro Lopez pleaded guilty to the murders of around 57 little girls. The fact is, Pedro Lopez told Captain Cordova everything, but at the start, the police weren't 100% convinced by Pedro's confession. Perhaps the man they had in custody was a madman raving about crimes he didn't even commit. It wouldn't be the first time. After all, he was homeless. Maybe he found prison more comfortable than the streets, and this was his attempt to find free room and board. But those suspicions quickly faded as Pedro Lopez led the police to the graves of over 50 little girls. The townspeople were so thirsty for the child killer's blood that when they brought him with them to show them where the bodies were, he had to be dressed up like a police officer for his own protection. 2 months later, in 1980, he pleaded guilty to 110 murders, over 100 little innocent girls. Law enforcement stated that Pedro could have been charged with 350 murders, but extra trials in Peru and Colombia would have just been too complex and too expensive for Ecuador. And Pedro wasn't even sorry. As a matter of fact, he never showed any remorse at all. Once the truth was out, he was quite happy to talk about what he did and how much joy it gave him. He compared himself to spectators at a bullfight, waiting to see either the bull or the matador face sudden death, which doesn't make any sense to anyone. But still, that's what he said. He also said there's a divine and wonderful moment when he has his hands wrapped around a little girl's neck. He said he could look in her eyes and watch as a certain light or spark would suddenly fizzle out. He stated that the moment of death is exciting, and that someday when he gets out, he will feel that moment again. He explained that he will be happy to kill again. Pedro believes it's his mission to kill, and he relished the attention he got, never missing an opportunity to talk about his crimes on camera. After leading authorities to over 50 bodies, Pedro claimed he was tired and refused to help anymore. The coward confessed to 350 murders in total, and he was convicted and found guilty of the 110 murders that he was charged with. But Ecuador had no death penalty. It had been abolished for social reasons 100 years prior to Pedro's convictions. He would serve his time alive in prison, but the families obviously weren't amused. They offered a reward of around $25,000 for anyone who would end the life of Pedro Lopez behind bars. But Pedro was reportedly held in the center of an abandoned part of the prison, on top of a mountain. He was kept there, incarcerated away from other inmates for his own protection and for theirs. Pedro had spent most of his years in solitary confinement on top of that mountain. And during that time, it's reported that only one person was ever granted an interview with the monster of the Andes, a Canadian reporter named Ron Leitner, who described his meeting with the child murderer. Ron was searched for weapons when he entered the facility. He quietly made his way down the hall towards. He was actually the warden's 26-year-old daughter, and she seemed to ignite Pedro's desires. Lopez told the warden that he hadn't touched a woman in years, and the only way he would do the interview was if he were permitted to touch the hands of the warden's daughter. Everyone who heard what he said gasped in shock. Guards raised their guns to an aim, and the atmosphere was tense as the brave girl extended her hands towards the monster. Pedro very delicately touched the tips of his fingers to her wrists. Anything could have happened, but Pedro released the warden's daughter without harm, later stating that she was too old for him. The gun stayed fixed on Pedro Lopez as he answered every question Ron Leitner asked him. By the end of his reign of terror, Pedro had developed an insatiable appetite for the torture and murder of little girls. Before he was caught, he had been killing 2 or 3 girls a week, every week, for 3 years. He claimed he was the man of the century and that no one would ever forget him. Lopez explained that he enticed his young victims by offering them presents, such as mirrors or small ornaments. He led them to secluded locations where he had pre-dug their graves, occasionally right beside the recently interred remains of his previous victims. At times, he didn't even bother to bury them. Pedro also admitted to enjoying the act of tracking tourist families, particularly those with attractive blonde daughters. He devoted considerable time to stalking English and Scottish families, but he never acted on his impulses because their parents were too vigilant and protective. He once confessed to investigators that he favored Ecuadorian girls due to their more gentle, trusting, and innocent nature compared to their Colombian counterparts. Pedro would acquire his local victims by lurking around the markets of the towns, looking for girls with a certain look in their faces, a look of innocence and beauty, things he wanted to steal. His victims had to be what he called good girls, usually working with their mothers. He would stalk them for a couple of days, waiting for the poor child to be left alone. Once protective eyes were off the little girl, Lopez would swoop in and give her a trinket as a gift. He would then talk his victims into following him to the edge of town, with the promise of providing her with another gift that she could present to her mother. This was the sick monster's modus operandi for abducting children. He would keep them there with him and hold them like a loving parent until sunrise. Then, at the first sight of light in the sky, he would get excited, rape them, force himself on the child with his hands around her throat, and then strangle her to death as the sun rose. He never killed at night, claiming it was only good if he could see her eyes when she died. Pedro said the kill would have been wasted in the dark, so he never killed anyone at night, as a rule. He had to watch them die in the daylight. Pedro said he spent a lot of time making sure they were dead. The piece of filth called himself considerate because of this. He would use a mirror to check and see if they were still breathing. Then he would cut their throats or wrists to see if the blood was still pumping. If the victim was still alive, he would finish them off. He said sometimes he would have to kill them all over again, and he claimed they never screamed because they didn't expect anything to happen. The girls were too innocent to suspect his evil intentions. Lopez also acted out strange fantasies with the dead bodies of his victims, propping them up in graves and talking to them as if they were alive. He would sometimes pose 3 or 4 little girls up in the same hole. He claimed his friends liked company, saying it was like having a tea party, but because his victims were dead and couldn't move, Pedro would eventually get bored and go find more little girls. When asked why he only chose young girls, he stated, "Why have old chicken when you can have young chicken?" Which again makes no sense. In Ecuador, this monster was only sentenced to 16 years inside due to Ecuadorian law. The public was outraged, but there was nothing anyone could do. Then, to add insult to injury, Pedro Alonso Lopez walked free from Garcia Moreno prison on the 31st of August in 1994. After serving only 14 years behind bars. He reportedly got an early release for good behavior. Rumor was Pedro would be extradited to Colombia, where he would face a firing squad, but sadly, that never happened. He was sent back to Colombia, where they attempted to try him for a 20-year-old murder. Instead of being convicted, Pedro was declared insane in 1995 and institutionalized in a psychiatric facility. And here's the next kick in the face. 3 years later, in February of 1998, Pedro Alonso Lopez, who admitted to killing 350 little girls, was declared sane and released, pending a $50 bill and additional stipulations that he should continue his psychiatric treatment and report himself to police on a monthly basis. Neither of those stipulations were ever upheld. He later showed up at his elderly mother's house in El Espinal. She had pleaded with authorities to never release her son, but they had, and he was standing in her doorway. She thought Pedro was going to murder her. After all, he had stated on TV that he blamed her for every pain in his heart. Pedro instructed his trembling mother to get down on his knee so he could give her his blessing. Then he simply asked for his life inheritance, which was odd considering she was alive. Maybe he meant something left behind from his father. On December 20th, 2017, a press conference was held during which Mark Perez, special agent in charge of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, announced a breakthrough in the disappearance of Mike Williams, a Tallahassee real estate appraiser who was originally presumed to have drowned while duck hunting on Lake Seminole on December 16, 2000, and was eaten by alligators. "Being here now, I can tell you what happened to Mike Williams," Jerez said. Mike Williams did not drown in the lake. He wasn't eaten by alligators. He didn't leave town and leave his wife and 18-month-old daughter behind. He was murdered. In the interest of the investigation, we cannot yet release details, but I am happy to report that this morning investigators notified the Williams family of recent discoveries in the case. Today's story is not only about love, betrayal, infidelity, and greed, but also about a mother's resilience. For 17 years and 4 days, Cheryl Williams, Mike's mom, disagreed that her son had drowned in Lake Seminole and pushed with tenacity for law enforcement to investigate her son's disappearance. She believed with all her heart that those responsible would be punished, believed even when no one else did. "I had two choices. He was alive or dead. I chose to believe he was alive, and I really think that's what helped me," Cheryl said on December 20th, 2017. "A lot of people called me crazy, but if I had given up, we never would have found him." The day before the press conference, Brian Winchester, a close friend of Mike and his wife Denise, who later married Brian, was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Mike's mother was right. Retribution came to those responsible, and ironically, they were the cause of the truth coming out. In 2000, Brian and Denise's affair, which began in 1997, turned into a murder. And years later, they went from lovers to strangers who didn't trust each other. Brian was very afraid that after the divorce, Denise would inform the police about what had happened to Mike, so he attacked her. Denise, on the other hand, went to great lengths to get him a life sentence. She was very persuasive in asking the jury for the maximum sentence, and it was these efforts that led to Brian having nothing to lose, and he made a deal with the prosecutor. Brian was sentenced to 20 years in 2017 for the kidnapping of Denise Williams, but he avoided a life sentence. Denise was celebrating the victory and was unaware that the conviction was part of a deal in which Brian Winchester, 49, admitted to planning the murder and a 17-year cover-up of the murder, and received immunity from any prosecution for his role in the case. In exchange, he led investigators to Mike's body and gave a full and truthful confession. It would only be a few months later, and on May 8, 2018, Denise Williams would be arrested. At first glance, things are a little confusing, aren't they? Let's break down this case in detail. Jerry Michael Williams was born on October 16, 1969, in Bradfordville, north of Tallahassee, the son of a bus driver and a kindergarten teacher. Family and friends called him Mike. Even though the family didn't have much money, and the boy, along with his older brother, grew up living in a trailer, those were happy times. The parents cared about their son's future, and instead of building a house, they set aside money for the education of both boys, who themselves worked part-time at night in supermarkets. The sons enrolled in North Florida Christian High School. There, Mike excelled. He became student council president, played soccer, and was active in the Key Club. At the age of 15, Mike started duck hunting as a hobby and met Denise Merrill. The young lad was a soccer player and student council president. Denise was a cheerleader and council secretary, and they began dating. Friends thought they were a great couple. While still in high school, Mike became best friends with Brian Winchester, whom Denise introduced him to. Brian later had a friend, Katie Thomas, and the two couples remained friends for the rest of Mike's life. After high school, Mike attended Florida State University, where he majored in political science and urban planning. The lovers graduated together. Denise became a public accountant. Mike became a real estate appraiser. Mike proved to be a valuable worker. He often worked 15 hours a day, and of course his career took off. In 1994, the young, successful man married Denise. It was around this time that Brian married Kathy as well. All four of them continued to stay in close contact. Mike loved his wife dearly, strived to provide for their family as best he could, and had incredible energy. At the age of 31, Mike Williams achieved considerable success. As a real estate appraiser, he was earning nearly $200,000 a year. The couple was able to afford a home in a small, upscale neighborhood on the east side of town, and in 1999 became happy parents. They had a daughter, whom the couple named Ansley. Mike's friends told me that he was always prudent. Since the young man was engaged in quite risky activities, he wanted to be sure that in case of disaster, his family would definitely be taken care of. Not surprisingly, Mike turned to his best friend who was working as an insurance agent at the time. Ryan sold him 2 insurance policies for $250,000 and later for $500,000. In 2000, Mike's father passed away. Williams was so stunned by this suddenness that, wanting to financially secure his own family, he again turned to a friend. Brian helped Mike to insure his life for $1 million. Thus, about 6 months before his disappearance, the life of the loving father of the family was insured for almost $2 million. According to Denise, on the morning of December 16, 2000, her husband woke up early to go duck hunting on Lake Seminole, a large reservoir connected to the Apalachicola River. It was the day of their 6th wedding anniversary, and the couple planned to celebrate the date at night in Apalachicola, a small town on the bayou. The wife and daughter waited for Mike at home at noon, but he never returned. Naturally, Denise became concerned and called her father, who in turn called Mike's best friend, Brian Winchester. Together with his father, Brian drove to Lake Seminole. There they found Mike's Ford Bronco car near the boat dock. But Mike himself was nowhere to be found. The men went around to all the places Mike liked to hunt, but couldn't even find the boat. So they decided to call the police. After investigators from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Agency were called, the search for Mike began. A few hours later, a helicopter pilot found the boat drifting about 225 feet from the boat ramp. A search of the boat turned up Mike's shotgun, still in its case. Apparently, he never got to use it. The search became a rescue operation. Locals believed that before the 3 rivers were dammed to form the lake, the reservoir was the site of an orchard. Thus, the lake got its name Stump Field, due to the many remaining stumps that protruded above and below the water level, requiring careful handling of any motorized boat in the area. Because of this, searchers speculated that Williams hit a stump on his boat, fell out, and submerged himself in the water. His wading boots filled with water, and he probably drowned when he couldn't get out. Several other agencies were called in to help, including a dive team from Montgomery, Alabama, and the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. But the extensive and methodical search yielded nothing. Mike was never located. A week passed and the rescue operation turned into a body search operation. Teams were given probe holes to probe the bottom of the lake, and dogs were brought to the site. 10 days into the search, volunteers found a camouflage-patterned hunting hat that could not be linked to Williams. Officials with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Agency speculated that Mike had been eaten by alligators, which is why the body could not be found. There were actually quite a few alligators living in the lake. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement found no signs indicating a violent death and agreed with that theory. After 5 weeks, the search was called off. The day after the search was called off, Denise held a memorial service for Mike, less than 2 months after the alleged accident. It seemed to everyone that Denise had come to terms with the loss of her husband, but Mike's mother had not. 6 months later, in June 2001, an angler discovered wading boots floating in the lake. Divers searched the lake area and retrieved a lightweight hunting jacket and flashlight from the bottom. In one of the jacket's pockets was a hunting license with Williams's name and signature. The find raised many questions. Neither the hunting jacket nor the boots had visible teeth marks indicative of an alligator attack. None of the items found showed signs of having been in the water for 6 months. The boots were not slimy and the flashlight still worked. However, a week later, Denise's attorney asked the court to declare Mike Williams dead. Based on the items found, he suggested that alligators and other aquatic life had swallowed the body whole. The motion was granted. The death certificate said Mike died on December 16, 2000. Cause of death: accidental drowning while duck hunting on Lake Seminole. The body has yet to be recovered. This is how Mike Williams's story might have ended if not for Cheryl Williams, who refused to give up and continued to search for her son. "All I know is that I can't stop looking for him until I find him," she said. Cheryl's efforts seriously strained her relationship with her former sister-in-law. Denise demanded she stop searching and accept reality. She said, I'm tired of seeing articles about Mike and his disappearance. I just want to move on with my life. If you keep pushing this investigation, you will never see your granddaughter again. Cheryl couldn't give up on her son, and Denise carried out her threat. If not for the mother's persistence, her son's story might have remained submerged at the bottom of a dark, algae-covered lake. It took Cheryl Williams 3 years to convince law enforcement officials to open an investigation into her young son's disappearance. I made phone calls, put up signs about my missing son, wrote to the governor of Florida every day, compiled my notes into an evidence book, asked people to post on social media, and contacted reporters, Cheryl will tell you years later. The persistent mother contacted Matthew Oresco, an alligator expert. In his response, he explained that alligators do not feed during the cold winter months. Cold weather causes water temperatures to drop, so alligators don't feed in the winter. All they do is maintain their body temperature. 14 degrees is too cold for an alligator to be interested in food at all. Moreover, Oresco wrote that after an alligator kill, there is always forensic evidence left behind. Eventually, after 3 years, Cheryl Williams convinced law enforcement to drop the ridiculous alligator theory and launch an official investigation into her son's disappearance. The case was reopened because of little-known facts regarding alligators' eating habits. Evidence gathered from interviews and a little official data convinced investigators that Williams' death was no accident. My gut feeling is that Mike did not die in Lake Seminole, and that's the general consensus of all the law enforcement agencies working on this case, said Rami Austin, a former investigator with the 2nd District State's Attorney's Office who prosecuted Mike's case. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Agency initially took over the case because Williams was considered a missing hunter. Officers spent 735 hours searching a 10-acre section of the lake for the body, but didn't spend a minute looking for signs of wrongdoing. Jackson County Sheriff's deputies brought in to help with the search also did not consider other possibilities. Investigators interviewed everyone involved in the search, and police officer David Arnett, who was present at the scene that day, years later said, "Some things immediately look strange. Williams didn't usually hunt alone. His truck was found in an undeveloped area from which he would have had to drag the boat over mud, not on the nearby concrete boat launch he usually used. A terrible storm that night should have pushed the boat to the east shore, but it was found on the west shore. The boat's motor wasn't running, but it was full of gasoline. If Mike had been driving the boat and fell out of it, it would have continued to float in circles until it ran out of gas." Unfortunately, law enforcement began to doubt too late that they were dealing with a simple drowning. The crime scene had already been trampled by numerous volunteers and searchers. A car that could have served as a clue was taken by the family without any verification. Potential witnesses were missed. Denise Williams and Brian Winchester became suspicious to investigators because they learned that Winchester had divorced his wife Kathy and married Denise. They also learned of Denise's unexpected financial gain of nearly $2 million from her late husband's life insurance policy. Detectives determined that it was Winchester who sold the policy to Mike. They also found it strange that Denise, as Mike's wife, did not want to have anything to do with the investigation and tried to prevent Cheryl's activity, even forbidding the grandmother to communicate with her granddaughter. In 2005, the newly married couple were called in for questioning, which gave nothing new to the investigation. Brian provided an alibi for the morning of the disappearance of Mike Williams. He said he was 60 miles from the lake, at home, in bed, as his ex-wife Kathy could attest. He said he had intended to go hunting with his father-in-law in the morning, but overslept. Denise's interrogation also yielded no new leads. In 2008, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement announced that Mike's disappearance was not an accident, and they believe he was the victim of a crime. However, without sufficient evidence, they alas cannot prosecute. We have suspicions, but we need proof. Another investigation failed to find out her son's fate, but Cheryl Williams did not give up again. Her efforts led to the Discovery Cable Channel doing a story on Mike's disappearance and subsequent investigations in late 2011. By then, Cheryl had become disillusioned with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, believing it was either incompetent or uninterested in solving the case. Beginning in 2012, Mike's mother wrote about one letter a day to the governor, Rick Scott, asking him to either assign the investigation to another agency or appoint a special prosecutor to do so. Cheryl sent 2,600 letters to the governor over 9 years. In 2012, Denise caught Brian cheating and they broke up. The following year, Denise filed for divorce. After a few more years, an appraisal of the former family home was to take place, after which even property issues would no longer bind them. This event was a turning point in Mike's case. Brian didn't want a divorce. Denise didn't want to continue the relationship. They were constantly fighting, and the Williams investigation was poking fun at them. Brian would call Denise, and she stopped returning his calls. He couldn't handle the stress level. On August 5, 2016, the day a real estate appraisal was due as part of a court order, Denise left her home to drive to work at Florida State University. While talking to her sister on the phone, she saw someone climb over the back seat of her car. It turned out to be Winchester. Brian pressed a loaded gun against Denise's ribs and told her to drive straight ahead. He said he had to do that because she wasn't answering his calls. Denise tried to calm Brian down, agreed with everything he said, and promised to give him a chance to save their marriage. Brian believed it. Denise assured him that she wouldn't go to the police and report what he had just done, and Brian got out of the car. As he got out, he took the brown sheet, plastic sheeting, bleach sprayer, and tools with him. It became clear that Denise had miraculously escaped death. Denise called emergency services. Brian was quickly arrested and charged with kidnapping, which is a first-degree felony in Florida and carries a life sentence as the maximum penalty. He was also charged with domestic violence and armed burglary. The court decided to keep Brian in custody without bail. Cheryl Williams expressed hope that this development will lead to the solving of her son's disappearance case. Brian is not going to let Denise run around alone with all that money, she told the New York Daily News. I pray that he will tell us what really happened. And Brian did tell, bargaining himself an extremely favorable deal with the prosecutor and avoiding a life sentence. At first, I think we were all doing really well. But I wasn't a good husband, Brian began his story. One day, I found a note in my first wife Kathy's purse and realized she was cheating on me. I wanted revenge. We often went to bars and concerts with Denise and Mike. I had been friends with Denise since high school. I was never really attracted to her. But after Kathy cheated on me, I started looking at other women differently. The affair between Brian and Denise began in October 1997. One-time drunken sex at a rock concert quickly escalated to frequent secret meetings. We started meeting at hotels during the workday. We met whenever we had the opportunity. Brian recounted. He did not want a divorce. Denise made it clear that she would never divorce her husband. Public opinion was important to her, and she did not want to share custody of her daughter. Over time, the affair became more than just meeting for casual sex. Denise and Brian thought of themselves as a couple, exchanging gifts and love letters. It became clear that they couldn't go on like this. They could not be without each other, and divorce was unacceptable to Denise. Her pious image was not to be harmed. Around this time, Mike almost died in a hunting accident. Brian saved him, and Denise suddenly saw a way out of the situation. After the deal with the prosecutor, Brian will reveal, the year 2000 prompted us to start talking about Mike and Kathy's death. Denise wanted it all on me, not her, and she wanted a scenario where it wasn't a murder but an accident. She wanted death to be left up to God. That way she could live with it. After considering various options, Brian and Denise settled on a boating accident. In doing so, they timed the murder so that they could get the maximum possible payout on Mike's life insurance policy. They both realized that Mike had to be killed before one of the 3 policies expired at the end of December 2000. The plan was in place. Brian called his friend to go hunting. He said he'd found a great spot on the shores of Lake Seminole. Mike expected to go there with Brian and return home by noon to celebrate his anniversary with his wife. I told him that we were going to go to a special place and that he absolutely had to bring his wading boots with him. I had to make sure he took them with him because it was believed that if you fell overboard in wading boots, you would drown very quickly. The plan was to make death look like an accidental drowning. Once Brian and Mike were in the water, Brian pushed Mike out of the boat, but instead of sinking, he grabbed onto the stumps and began to wade through them to the shore. Brian panicked. I didn't know what to do. Mike started calling loudly for help. I didn't know how to get out of this situation. I had a shotgun. I was panicking and I shot him in the head. I didn't think about what I was doing. Things didn't go according to plan, and I needed to cover up what happened. There was hardly any time left. I should have been back home by now and getting ready to go hunting with my father-in-law. No one knew I was at the lake with Mike, so I decided it would be best for me to drive home and pretend like I had overslept. I drove home and hoped that Kathy was still asleep. I entered the house as quietly as I could. Katie was asleep. My phone was on the floor. I went to bed, called my father-in-law, and apologized. Brian did everything he could to create an alibi for himself. Then he hid the body. Denise didn't know that Brian had shot Mike in the head and buried him. Brian tried to tell her, but she didn't want to listen. It was enough for her that her husband was gone. Denise wanted to go on living with the idea that it was God who kept him from swimming out and let him drown. According to Brian, they promised each other that neither of them would ever say anything. Denise and Brian justified what happened by saying that the main reason Mike was killed was because it was impossible for them to live together. We said the money was just the cherry on the cake, Brian would pronounce in court. Investigators learned that it was Brian who planted a hat, boots, flashlight, and license. First, he needed to keep searchers from leaving a lake, and afterwards he needed grounds to pronounce Mike dead so Denise could get insurance, since a recognition process usually takes about 5 years. The lovers managed it in just 7 months. Including Social Security and other benefits, Denise received about $2 million. On May 8, 2018, Denise Williams was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and accessory to a felony, which carried a life sentence. Denise pleaded not guilty to all 3 charges. In February 2019, she was sentenced to life in prison. 5 months later, Mike and Denise's daughter, Ansley, received all of her late father's assets and insurance money owed to Denise. In January 2020, Denise Williams appealed the conviction and life sentence. Her attorney argued before Florida's First District Court of Appeal that there was no evidence that she was involved in committing the murder. In November 2020, the murder conviction was overturned, but the 30-year sentence for conspiracy to commit murder was upheld. Denise is now in custody at the Florida Women's Reception Center. She will be 78 years old when she is released. Brian Winchester was transferred to Madison Correctional Institute in Florida to serve the remainder of his sentence. His current release date is set for July 30th, 2036. He will be 67 years old. Ansley, daughter of Mike and Denise, insists her mother is innocent and places the blame on Brian Winchester. She refused to speak to any media regarding the outcome of the case and her personal life. According to Cheryl and Nick, Ansley's uncle, they have not been able to connect with Ansley. Cheryl is very sorry that she has lost not only her son, but also her granddaughter.